The town I grew up in was pretty country, to put it lightly. Nothing but farms, crops, abandoned churches, and ugly worn-down houses. Everyone around us was pretty broke. Property taxes were like $1,000 a year, if that. With that came a lot of sketchball characters. Hell, even our neighbor was a weirdo. Nice, but weird. We weren't well off ourselves, but things at least got a little better for my family when my siblings and I were old enough to work too. When this app Hot or Not was still a thing many years back, I matched this girl Kelly, who I started seeing for a while. We matched in late summertime, and we were seeing each other through September already. This was early October. Kelly and I were looking for a nice, cheap date to go on. Really, there wasn't much to do around there. We've gone on hikes, explored, and gotten food. Not much else going on. So we took a new route in the car this day, somewhere neither of us had been, just to find something. We found this little restaurant sitting in a random parking lot on the side of the road. It had outdoor seating, so we went there. It was a warm, cloudy day when we arrived and got seated at a table outside the restaurant. We were there for 45 minutes to an hour, and after leaving, it grew noticeably foggy out. We continued to drive down this route we'd never been down before, a really desolate road with just open fields and farmland on either side, with occasional patches of trees and woods. Then we passed something different. It was a sign for a pumpkin patch, only it was a very cheaply made sign. It wasn't some big billboard or anything like that. It was a wooden picket sign that said "Pumpkin picking this way," and an arrow pointing to the right. Right behind the sign was a dirt driveway cutting through the field. Through the fog, we saw a house that the driveway led to, so a spur-of-the-moment decision, we both agreed we wanted to check it out because why not? I drove off the road down the driveway, and we passed the house into this back area which was covered by trees in two directions, the left side and the far back side. Tucked between the house and woods was this big pumpkin patch. It was a genuine pumpkin farm, and we saw at least 200 pumpkins scattered all over the place, and that was just what the fog allowed us to see. We parked next to this old jalopy of a pickup truck, the only other vehicle visible on the property. We noticed an older couple sitting on the back deck of the house. As we got out, the two of them got up and greeted us. I said we're here for the pumpkin picking, and the old woman said with a smile, "Welcome, pick anything you'd like." I asked her how much it would be for a pumpkin, and the old woman said it's free. We were surprised. The fog was acting as a sort of barrier, so we couldn't clearly see the two. It was a little creepy, but I could still tell that it looked like the old man was smiling at Kelly. His smile was very gummy, it was kind of gross. We both said thank you, and started walking into the pumpkin patch. A lot of the pumpkins were on the smaller side, or mushy and just not very attractive. The ground was also kind of wet from the fog, I guess, and some of the pumpkins felt wet and muddy too. It was hard to find a really nice one, but eventually we did find one. I picked up this big, healthy-looking pumpkin. It was heavy. I brought it over to the back deck where the old couple just was. They weren't there anymore. I asked Kelly if we should just leave. She said probably. It really felt like we were clear to leave since we already thanked the couple and they made it clear they were free. So we got back in the car, and I started doing a 3-point turn on the dirt driveway to leave, when we heard someone yelling outside. We both got startled and turned to face the house, where we saw a middle-aged man in a cap yelling, "Hey, stop." I lowered the window, and he put his face through the window and yelled, "What the hell are y'all doing? I'm calling 911. I said, "What did we do?" And he said, "Put that pumpkin back right now." Kelly and I, talking over each other, both tried to explain to the man that the older couple told us to take whatever we wanted. I assumed they were his parents. The man said, "What older couple? What are you talking about?" I replied, "Are your parents also here?" He said, "I ain't got no parents." Kelly and I, both equally confused, looked at each other. I said, "Sir, there was an older couple sitting on your back deck 10 minutes ago, and they told us to take whatever we wanted." The man said, "There ain't no older couples here." He asked where the pumpkin is. I told him in the back. I unlocked the door and he grabbed the pumpkin. He said if we ever came back here, he'd shoot us, and then he spit at the ground and walked back to his house. I drove us out of there. We were as confused as could be. We considered the idea that maybe it was a joke, but that would be a real sick joke. I made a joke saying, "What if they were ghosts?" And Kelly said stop, clearly freaked out. But then I got the chills myself as I thought about what I just said. There was silence in the car for a few seconds, and I know we both pondered that idea. Out of curiosity, one day my two siblings went to that pumpkin farm to go pumpkin picking. They bought a pumpkin from the guy we saw, and they probed him a bit, asking about the farm and if the man lives there with anyone. The man said he lives there alone. This was unsettling to hear. It truly to this day doesn't make a lick of sense. Could the man have been lying about the older couple being there? I don't know. Possibly, but why? The scarier question is, what if he wasn't lying, and he truly does live alone? Then who were those people? It was late October when I woke up to one of my best friends, Connor, hitting me up asking if I was down to come to his house later. It was a Saturday afternoon and I was in high school at the time, so I spent most of my weekends with friends. Connor's parents were out of town for the weekend, and he was home alone with one of his older sisters, whom I'll just call Chantel. She was supposedly watching him the entire weekend. With that information, I knew he was just asking me to come over and party. Again, I didn't have any work responsibilities to worry about at the time, so I agreed to the idea and headed over to his house. When I got to his house, we played some Call of Duty on his family room's couch for a few hours, talking about school, sports, girls, and whatever else we cared about at the time. Eventually, he brought up the idea of going to a Halloween party in his neighborhood that a bunch of people from our high school were going to. At first, I was a bit hesitant of the idea, but after some convincing, I was down to go. I'm not introverted or anything, I just wasn't feeling like partying that night, but Connor was dying to go, so trying to be a good friend, I agreed to go. I asked him about getting some kind of costume, and he had 2 security staff shirts that we could just throw on and use as the bare minimum of a Halloween costume. We continued to play on Xbox for a few more hours until 10:30 rolled around. Connor ran upstairs to Chantel's room, telling her we were going, as if she cared. Then we threw on our shirts and headed out. After a quick 5-minute walk, we pulled up to a Halloween-decorated house where we could hear the music blaring from inside. We walked past the decorations and through the door where we were slammed with the loud music we heard outside. The place was packed with maybe 70 other high school kids raving and just talking in groups throughout the house. It was your average high school party. A few minutes later, I'd already lost Connor as I was pulled aside by Lino, one of my baseball teammates who I'd hardly seen at all that year. He sat me down on a couch in a circle with some of my other friends and teammates. We continued to talk for a couple hours, laughing at dumb memories brought up in conversation and partaking in activities that normally go down at parties. At this point in the night, I was feeling tired and completely out of it. I knew it was time for me to go home and get some rest for the night. I looked through the party for Connor, where he was flirting with a girl in the corner of the kitchen. As I accidentally interrupted his conversation, I asked him if it was cool for me to go back to his house and sleep. He agreed and said he was going to stay for a little longer, but the girl he was talking to asked if I could go get some drinks from the basement. I agreed to do so after realizing I completely interrupted their deep conversation. It was the least I could do. It didn't take me long to find the basement, as I opened the door and headed down the dimly lit stairs. I stumbled down the last few steps and fell into the fridge. As I opened it, I was greeted by a man's voice behind me, who tried quietly saying boo. I jumped and threw my hands up, facing the direction I heard the voice from. There was a tall, 35-year-old looking man wearing a black cloak costume and standing behind me with a grin on his face, making a surprise gesture with his hands. "What the hell was that for?" I yelled, with a clear slur in my speech. The guy laughed and introduced himself as the party host's cousin. I was so out of it, I didn't even question why he was in a dark basement by himself, and there was a massive party going on upstairs with loud music. The guy awkwardly tried making conversation, but I told him I needed to get my friend his drink and leave the party. I'm honestly pretty open and chatty to strangers when I'm out of it like that, but even at that moment, I didn't like his vibe, and I tried everything I could to get away. He blurted, "Nice meeting you," as I turned around, walking up the creaking stairs. I told my friend goodbye and left the party. The lights and Halloween decorations on each house in the neighborhood lit up the street as I walked back to Connor's house. It didn't really matter though, because the walk was literally 5 minutes at most. I reflected on the weird exchange I had with that man in the basement as I walked, and I couldn't shake the odd vibes he gave off. The more I thought about it, the weirder it became in my head. I eventually got to Connor's house. It was completely dark, and Chantel's car was gone from the driveway, meaning I was home alone. I walked into the dark, eerie house and didn't bother turning on some lights, just headed straight to the basement to sleep. I walked down there and passed out on the couch. I lay like a baby for maybe 15 minutes until I heard a crashing noise upstairs. It It woke me right up. I tried listening for anything else, but I heard nothing. I thought I was hearing things, then tried getting back to sleep. I don't know how much time passed from when I first heard the crash, but I could hear the floorboards above me creaking like someone was walking on them. I thought it was Connor or Chantel, but it sounded way too heavy to be either of them. I pulled out my phone and texted Connor, asking if he was home yet. I stared at the ceiling, trying to listen. The door to the basement opened. I could hear a person walk down the staircase. I peeked around the bend of the room to see the stair opening. I saw the man I saw earlier at the party, standing right there, quietly, illuminated by the stair light. I tried not to make any noise, praying that the man would just walk away. A few moments passed by before he randomly turned and quietly walked out of the basement, closing the door. I picked up my phone and dialed 911. I explained the situation to them, gave them everything they needed, and I waited patiently in the basement for them to show up. I tried opening the windows down there, but they were all sealed shut. I had no escape through the basement door that the man was standing by earlier. The cops eventually came, and they arrested the man because he was still there. He was found hiding underneath Chantel's bed. She had gotten home and was getting ready for bed, and was moments from getting into the bed when she heard the cops knocking on the front door downstairs. I have no idea what his intention was, but clearly he followed me home. The whole encounter has really confused me. I'm just glad things played out the way they did. Oddly enough, the cops were able to review neighboring houses' cameras, and they saw the man following me home, but then he lost me after taking the corner into the cul-de-sac. He ended up lurking on Chantel, watching her get out of her car and walk into the house. Then he snuck around to the backyard and broke in through the back door. Always be alert of your surroundings. It was the middle of October. The leaves were just starting to change to that beautiful mix of orange and yellow. My wife Courtney and I are a gay couple. We've been married for 2 years now. We wanted to take advantage of the fall foliage and go to the Catskill Mountains in New York. We booked an Airbnb by Overlook Mountain, a popular hiking destination. We're avid hikers, so we go all over the country to explore national parks and famous hiking destinations. This was our third time going to Catskill, New York. The owner of the Airbnb was an adorable-looking sweet woman who was definitely in her 50s or 60s. Out of respect, I'll just name her Kathy. Kathy was very easy to work with and very responsive. She had the key to the little house hidden in a code-locked mailbox, and she gave me the code. Inside was a very rustic and cabiny type of feel, with wooden walls and floors, but bright-colored rugs to cover the wood floors. It was well kept and nice, spacious enough for 2 people. Outside was woods in all directions. There was a shed converted to a little clubhouse outside, with a pool table and dartboard and a bunch of things hung on the walls. We drove to the base of the Overlook Mountain Trail, and there were some people around. Not many, but a few. As we were ascending the mountain on foot, we'd pass occasional hikers on their way down. Eventually, we sat on a big rock overlooking an amazing cliff view, just admiring for a while. Eventually, we heard a footstep crunching a leaf behind us. We turned around and saw a woman by herself, leaning on a tree. She was like 55 or something. She was clearly looking at us until we turned and saw her. Then she awkwardly looked away. I would have otherwise said hi, but she made it weird. We just ignored it, until randomly we heard her say hi. So we turned again and saw she was looking at us. We said hi back. Then she asked where we're from. From here, we just got into a seemingly normal conversation with her. She said her name was Melinda, and she was from the area. She asked where we're staying, offering her knowledge of the area to suggest places to check out. I told her right up the road at an Airbnb. She suggested some places to go, and then the conversation kind of died off from there. Courtney and I said, well, it was nice meeting you, as we now started descending the trail back towards the car. Weirdly, we noticed the Melinda lady was now also heading down as well, but she was keeping a bit of a distance, not within earshot. We found a spot to rest on the way down for a minute, and we noticed Melinda seemed to stop too at the same time. She was still out of earshot. This was weird. We felt like she was following us, so we decided to just stay put and wait her out, see if she'd move. After a while, she finally did continue making her way down, past us. She looked at us and smiled and said okay as she walked past us. We waited till she was out of sight before we continued hiking down. We got back to the parking area a while later. and from there we went straight back to the Airbnb right up the road. We were exhausted, so we took a nap. Then we went out to eat at this place called Garden Cafe, which was highly rated. After that, it was pitch black out, so we went back to the Airbnb with plans to just cuddle up and watch movies. We had a long day of hiking, so we were going to sleep good. There was only a TV in the living room, but it was set up to have Netflix and everything, so we found a good movie to watch and put it on. We were so tired that we started drifting off to sleep halfway through the movie. I noticed Courtney was completely knocked out, and I was following suit, when suddenly, I was immediately snapped back awake to the sound of knocks at the door. We were in the middle of the woods. Knocks at the door were a huge concern. Nobody should be here. There was no peephole in the door. I couldn't check who was there. All the blinds were closed, and I wasn't going to dare peeking out of one of them. I shook Courtney awake and told her someone's at the door. I muted the TV, and we waited for a second set of knocks that came only seconds later. We both agreed there's no shot we were opening the door. It was still early, like 9 o'clock, so I texted Kathy asking if she was at the door. There was then a knock at the window, and a woman's voice on the other side asking if someone in there. Courtney and I were now freaked out. I'd say we were in a panic. Knocking on a stranger's window is not a normal thing somebody does. What happened next was even more disturbing. We heard the person trying to lift open the window. Thankfully, it was locked. Kathy was calling me now. I showed Courtney and she said maybe it is her outside, that's why she's calling. I picked up in a low voice, and Kathy on the other end told me she was at home, and she asked who was outside. When I told her what's happening, she sounded confused and concerned. None of her friends or relatives would go to that house, she said. She told us don't open the door, and we took her advice. After hanging up, there were now knocks on another window, and the voice called, "I need help, please let me in." We knew better than to fall for this. Something bad would happen if we let them in. We started to realize it could have been that weird lady from the hiking trail. Like, what if she followed us back to the Airbnb? We honestly wouldn't have even noticed. I went to the bedroom where it was completely pitch black, and I ever so delicately moved the blind up just a crack to peek outside. There was a man walking past the window. He didn't notice me. I went back to Courtney to tell her that there were multiple people out there. This was an invasion. We called 911. I gave them the address and stayed on the line. There were a few more knocks at the door, but we never answered. The people outside eventually gave up, I believe, because the knocks and yells stopped. The police took a while to get there, but when they did, we felt a lot better. The officers were very nice, and they stayed with us while we figured out what we wanted to do. I called Kathy again and explained what happened and why we didn't feel safe staying there tonight anymore. She was completely understanding. We still paid for that night, but the rest of the stay was canceled, and the officers stayed with us while we packed our things and loaded the car. One of them led us in his car to the nearest motel where we stayed for the night. Given the circumstances, we drove home the next day because, honestly, we just didn't want to be in the area after that. We think this was some kind of group that was looking for easy targets to abduct and may have been using a woman as some kind of scout to gain their trust, and they saw 2 young women by themselves, so they tried to target us. For future hikes, we've started to bring pepper spray with us just as a form of self-defense. Friday the 13th has long been considered a date cursed with bad luck. It's largely been a date that people look at as an excuse to do scary-themed activities like binging scary movies. But this is the first year since 2017 that Friday the 13th falls in October. So for this video, we're looking at some of the most terrifying events that have actually taken place on the notorious day of bad luck. Tupac Shakur, better known as a stage name simply as Tupac, was an American rapper widely considered to be one of the most influential and successful rappers of all time. Tupac was arguably responsible for some of the most memorable rap verses in history. And while much of his notoriety came about after his shocking death in the mid-1990s, he's still remembered and talked about today. On the night of September 7th, 1996, Tupac was in Las Vegas celebrating his business partner's birthday. And one night while there, he attended the Bruce Seldon vs. Mike Tyson boxing match with Suge Knight at the MGM Grand. Later that night at about 11:15 p.m., while at a stoplight, a white 4-door Cadillac sedan pulled up to the passenger side of Tupac's vehicle, and an occupant rapidly fired into the car. He was hit 4 times, once in the arm, once in the thigh, and twice in the chest, with 1 bullet entering his right lung. Tupac succumbed to his injuries 6 days later on September 13th, which was a Friday. The case went unresolved, with people suspecting his friend Suge Knight and even rapper Biggie Smalls of the murder. But recently, on September 29th, 2023, 60-year-old Dwayne Keith Davis was charged in the killing of Tupac. Dwayne is not accused of being the one to pull the trigger that night in Las Vegas, but he is, however, being accused of having been the one to call the hit on Tupac. The trial is still currently in progress. A lot of people refuse to fly on Friday the 13th, and while that may come down to pure superstition among some people, there have been a few tragedies in the air on this day. In October 1972, on Friday the 13th, a plane heading to Chile was forced to crash land in the Andes Mountains. The flight was carrying 45 passengers and crew, including 19 members of the Old Christians Club rugby union team, along with their families, supporters, and friends. 3 crew members and 9 passengers died immediately. Several more died soon afterward due to the frigid temperatures and the severity of their injuries. Survivors of the crash hid in the wreckage for warmth and were eventually forced to cannibalize and eat deceased passengers to survive. A rescue team was sent out, but the mission was called off after 10 days. However, 72 days after the crash, as the weather improved with the arrival of late spring, 2 survivors climbed a 4,700-meter mountain peak without gear and hiked for 10 days into Chile to seek help, traveling a total of 38 miles. The 2 men were able to alert authorities that there were still 16 survivors trapped in the mountains, leading to their rescue. But believe it or not, on the exact same Friday the 13th as this plane crash, the same exact date, was another plane crash that killed all 164 passengers and 10 flight crew. It was Aeroflot 217. The plane needed to land due to horrible weather conditions, but crashed upon landing in Russia just 3 miles away from the runway. The exact cause of the crash could not be determined, but it's speculated that it was largely to do with simply human error. Casualty-wise, it is one of the worst plane crashes in history. While these incidents are incredibly rare, perhaps there is a reason flights are cheaper on Friday the 13th. If you're not superstitious, perhaps it may be worth it. But now we move from the sky to the sea, looking at the Costa Concordia disaster. On Friday the 13th, January 2012, the 8-year-old Costa Cruises ship Costa Concordia just left Civitavecchia, Italy at approximately 7:18 p.m. On board were 1,022 crew members and 3,206 passengers. As the Concordia approached Giglio Island several hours later, it deviated from its standard course, moving closer to the small Tuscan island for a maritime salute, which included the cruise ship sounding its horn to show off to onlookers on the land. The Concordia had performed several in the past, but the area was known for rock outcroppings, and at some point, such a formation was noticed in the ship's path. Francesco Schettino, the captain, ordered a change in course, but allegedly due to language issues, the Indonesian helmsman steered the boat in the opposite direction. It took a little over 10 seconds to correct the maneuver, and the boat's bow ultimately swung clear, but the stern collided with the reef at approximately 9:45 p.m. The damage had been done. The Concordia's port side had suffered a 174-foot tear. This caused the ship to list and then partially sink, landing unevenly on an underwater ledge. Although a 6-hour rescue effort brought most of the passengers ashore, 33 people died, 27 passengers, 5 crew, and later a member of the salvage team. An investigation focused on the shortcomings in the procedures followed by the Concordia's crew and the actions of the captain, Francesco, who left the ship prematurely, leaving behind about 300 passengers on board the sinking ship, most of whom were rescued by helicopters or motorboats in the area. Schettino was found guilty of manslaughter and sentenced to 16 years in prison. Despite receiving criticism, Costa Cruises and its parent company Carnival Corporation didn't face criminal charges. The total cost of the disaster, including victims' compensation, refloating, towing, and scrapping costs, is estimated at $2 billion, more than 3 times the ship's original $612 million construction cost. The cruise line offered compensation to passengers to pay for all damages, including the value of the cruise. Only 1/3 of the survivors took the offer. This remains the biggest modern cruise ship catastrophe. David Anthony McGreevy was born in Southport, England in 1951 to Bella and Thomas McGreevy. David was the second oldest of 6 children. Since David's father was a sergeant in the British Army, a lot of his childhood was spent moving from one army base to another. This could mean that one year he was being educated in an army school in England, the next in Germany. According to David's mother, living in Germany was his happiest time. David's mother Bella later said she could only remember one childhood incident of concern, as David was otherwise allegedly well behaved. In 1967, 15-year-old David left school and enlisted in the Royal Navy. However, he was dismissed from the Navy in August 1971 after being court-martialed for starting a fire that destroyed a mess wardroom. David then moved back in with his parents, but around this time his life was crumbling as his fiancée broke up with him and he was fired from several jobs. For this reason, his parents became fed up with him and kicked him out. So David turned to his friend Clive Kenneth Ralph, who let him board with he and his wife, Dorothy Elsie, and their 2 small children, Paul and Dawn. Clive and Dorothy had been school friends, and there was a 5-year age gap between them. They had married in September 1968, when Dorothy was 16 and pregnant with Paul. At the time David moved in, Dorothy was pregnant with their 3rd child, Samantha, who was born on the 14th of July in 1972. With both Clive and Dorothy busy working, David acted as a babysitter for the Ralph children. He was regarded by family and neighbors as well as the Ralphs as a person who loved children. So what would soon happen was nothing short of unexpected and horrific. On Friday the 13th, in April 1973, Elsie was picked up from work by Clive, who had left home late with the children all asleep. When the couple arrived at their home, the police were already there, and they escorted them to the police station, where they were told of the horrible truth that their children had been murdered. So what happened? Well, David was known to be a heavy drinker and sometimes a violent drunk. He had gone to a nearby pub earlier that evening with a friend, and he had 7 pints of beer. The 2 men had played cards and darts, though a small altercation took place prior to leaving the pub. Clive picked David up from the pub and brought him to look after the children, while Clive went to get Elsie from work. Sometime between 10:15 and 11:15 p.m., David, while completely wasted, became infuriated with the children, beginning with the baby Samantha, who had been crying for her bottle. David violently killed the 3 children, each in a different yet brutal manner. After killing the 3 children, David went down to the basement and retrieved a pickaxe to further mutilate their bodies. David was arrested by police at 3:50 a.m., walking on a road near the Ralphs' home. Upon his arrest, David initially denied any responsibility, but several hours later, he admitted to the murders, with his only explained reasoning disgustingly being simply that the baby was crying. David was sentenced to multiple life sentences with minimums of 20 years, and in prison he was subjected to frequent abuse by other prisoners, and he spent most of his 45 years behind bars in protected conditions. In December of 2018, a parole board cleared David for release, declaring that he had changed significantly and he was no longer a risk. There's bound to be anywhere from 1 to 3 Friday the 13ths each year. If you are superstitious and choose to be more low-key on this inevitable date in an attempt to escape any bad luck, you may end up like Daz Baxter. On Friday the 13th in 1976, Daz decided to just stay in the bed for the day to avoid anything bad happening, only to be killed when the floor of his apartment block collapsed under him. There's countless other stories and examples of misfortune and downright tragedy that's happened on Friday the 13th, but this could be said for literally every other date on the calendar. At the end of the day, maybe it's just another day. Halloween is the one night of the year where being scared is supposed to be good fun. However, amid all the harmless activities like trick-or-treating, sometimes genuinely frightening and disturbing things can happen. This includes some horrific murders and unexplained disappearances, which are far more terrifying than any haunted houses or corn mazes. These are 8 unsolved mysteries and disappearances that happened on Halloween. In 2015, 24-year-old Michael Miller and his friends were hosting a Halloween party in the house that they rented together on Halloween night. Michael says they invited around 40 people and told their friends to bring friends, and the crowd that came was actually around 40 people. At Halloween parties, typically people's costumes don't cover their faces unless part of the costume involves a mask or a face covering. But even when a costume will include a mask, usually at least at some point at a party it would be expected for the wearer to take it off just to let their face breathe for a little bit. That's why Michael and his housemates were suspicious when there was one guy in basically regular clothes, but who was wearing a gruesome looking Halloween mask referred to as an Elephant Man mask. He was sitting in a chair just seemingly doing nothing, making some of the guests confused and uncomfortable. Nobody knew who it was, so Michael eventually went up to the guy and asked who it was, to which the man replied Billy in a deep voice. Michael said he didn't know any Billy, and asked him to remove his mask for a second. The man refused, so Michael asked the man to leave, and he did. At this same party, 2 girls fell unconscious, likely to being slipped Rufalin, and that man was suspected to be the culprit. Even more, that same Saturday night, 2 neighboring houses were broken into and robbed. That masked man was never identified, and while it's not 100% certain that he was responsible for slipping something in anybody's drinks or for the nearby break-ins, it would be a fairly safe assumption. Cindy Song was a 21-year-old South Korean student attending Penn State University. In 2001, she dressed up in a bunny costume and attended a Halloween party at a nightclub near the college. She stayed at the club until around 2 a.m., then left for her friend's apartment where she spent the next few hours hanging out with her friends. She was then dropped off at her apartment at 4 a.m., and this was the last anybody ever saw of her. After Cindy was reported missing, a search of her apartment yielded no signs of a struggle or foul play. Police knew she had made it inside because her fake eyelashes and the backpack that she'd worn to the party were found inside the apartment, as well as her cell phone. The only things missing were her purse and wallet, suggesting that she'd possibly went out again. Her credit card showed no activity after her disappearance, and neither the authorities nor her family believed that she vanished willingly. However, after her disappearance, a witness reported seeing a man resembling Cindy in the Chinatown district of Philadelphia. She was inside a vehicle with an unidentified male and appeared to be crying for help. In 2003, a man named Hugo Marcus Selinsky was arrested after the remains of 5 people were found buried in his backyard. Selinsky told police that he and another man, Michael Kurkowski Jr., abducted Cindy off the street and kept her imprisoned in his walk-in safe until she perished, and then buried her on the property. However, none of the remains discovered could be identified as Cindy, and the only person who could confirm this was Kurkowski, but his body was one of the many buried on Selinsky's land. The case remains open to this day, and no evidence exists to link Selinsky. On Halloween night in 2002, 21-year-old University of Minnesota student Chris Jenkins and some of his friends visited a keg party before going to a place called the Lone Tree Bar and Grill. The bar was in downtown Minneapolis, where Chris was attending school. The group arrived around 10:30 p.m., but around an hour and a half later, Chris was removed from the bar by security for reportedly being too drunk, and he was banned from returning. Chris was left out in the cold. It was as low as 20 degrees Fahrenheit that night, and he was only wearing his costume, which consisted of Native American attire, and he was without his wallet, cell phone, or keys. From this point, he vanished without a trace. The area around the bar he was kicked out from was not considered safe, with a very high crime rate, and it was definitely not an ideal place to be roaming around at night alone and intoxicated. When no word was heard from Chris, his family hired a private investigator who was later told by witnesses that on that same night that Chris went missing, a large group of men attacked a lone person, presumed to be some kind of gang initiation, just across the street from the bar where Chris was last seen. If that wasn't enough concerning news for the family, 2 scent tracking dogs on separate days picked up Chris's trail on the sidewalk where the attack was alleged to have taken place and followed it to the same spot inside the parking garage next door, where a few drops of blood and a single red feather were found, a feather that clearly belonged to the costume Chris was wearing. Strangely, that's where the trail ended. Chris wasn't found until 4 months later, when his body was found floating in the Mississippi River, a victim of what was originally believed to be either a suicide or an accidental drowning. But further investigation caused the medical examiner to change the official cause of death from accidental drowning to homicide. This one was sent to me back in 2015. In 2007, a 12-year-old boy named Bradley was trick-or-treating with a group of friends in Colorado. The boys who were with Bradley early on in the night said that they were just going along with their trick-or-treating when one of the boys picked up on the fact that Bradley was missing. They retraced their steps in an attempt to find him and disturbingly found his cowboy hat sitting by the curb. Bradley was dressed in a homemade cowboy costume that day. A little ways up the road, Bradley's bag of candy was found as well, spilled out onto the street, almost leaving a trail. That was the last of Bradley's possessions that were found by the boys that night. It's unknown how Bradley disappeared without anyone noticing, but the most likely explanation would have to be that Bradley at some point wandered off on his own, leaving him vulnerable to predators on their favorite night of the year. But the only thing that may take away some credibility of that possibility would be the fact that a week later, Bradley's mother found his glasses in the backyard. The strange part was that Bradley's friends all said he was wearing glasses the last time they saw him, indicating he may have went back home in between the period that he went missing. No information was followed up with since. David Stone was a successful stock market analyst, making good money and a stable career, described by friends and family as a bright, sharp young man. However, a few days before Halloween of 1988, he left his home during a Halloween party when a heated argument with a party guest turned violent. This was strange because anyone close to him would say he's the least violent person they knew. A few people reported seeing David sitting next to his car on a highway, until he apparently set off on foot into the desert. He was spotted by witnesses several times that day, including a farmer who found him wandering around on his property severely underdressed for the cold weather. He was apparently muttering something about being in search of the beast before vanishing for good. He was last seen on Halloween Day. His car was found on November 5th off the same highway. Search teams headed north from the location of the car and found two pyramids made out of rocks and surrounded by a triangle, with David's Rolex lying next to one of them. 3 miles further north, they found a Fibonacci sequence, which is a number pattern used in stock analysis, etched into the soil. Bloodhounds were able to track David's scent along the highway 13 miles north from where his car was abandoned, but the trail went cold. His family found a riddle-like note inside his vehicle that read, "They think the word is in the safe. 6 knives in Rob's room. Use buy your tea and use take your chances, Halloween." Use buy your teas and take your chances is a play on an old saying about stocks and gambling, and in the New Age movement, having 6 knives in your house would mean a regretful yet necessary rite of passage. 2 hikers found David Stone's remains in the desert in 1992. 4 years after he went missing. Despite having no idea what caused his erratic behavior or how and why he died, there was no sign of any foul play. In 1981, a Manhattan couple named Ronald Sisman and Elizabeth Platzman were murdered in their Greenwich Village apartment in the late hours of the night. The two were brutally beaten before being shot in the head, and the apartment was completely ransacked. Sisman, the boyfriend, was allegedly involved in drugs, so it was initially thought that that may have been a possible motive for the killings. However, the case took a bizarre turn when a prison informant claimed that one of his fellow inmates had somehow predicted the crimes weeks before it actually happened. That inmate was the Son of Sam killer David Berkowitz, an American serial killer who pleaded guilty to 8 shootings that began in New York in 1976. There's even speculation that Berkowitz was involved with a satanic cult and didn't commit all those murders on his own. According to the informant, Berkowitz told him that his alleged cult was planning to break into an apartment in Greenwich Village on Halloween night and perform a ritual murder by shooting a couple in the head before ransacking the place to remove incriminating evidence. This description matched exactly what went down in their apartment. When questioned, Berkowitz claimed that Ronald Sisman possessed snuff footage of one of the Son of Sam shootings and was planning to hand it over to the authorities to avoid some drug charges. But to this day, no evidence was found to support Berkowitz's claims. Therefore, no one knows if the murders of Ronald and Elizabeth had anything to do with the Son of Sam case. It was Halloween night of 1996 when 40-year-old Veronica Safransky of Argyle, Minnesota went missing. Veronica attended a Halloween costume party with a friend at Mick's Bar and Grill in Warren, Minnesota a few nights before Halloween. Veronica's friend was unable to locate her inside the bar around midnight. However, witnesses told authorities that Veronica was seen with a man named Kevin Skiervan leaving the bar together. They left the venue in his black pickup truck with Oregon license plates. This was the last moment Veronica was seen. She was reported as a missing person later the next day. And later that year, a belt believed to be part of her costume was found along a country road not far away. An extensive search of the area didn't yield any evidence as to where she could be. Kevin Skirvin, the man she was seen leaving the bar with, had a history of sexual assault convictions, and he admitted to departing Mick's Bar and Grill with Veronica, but claimed that he did not know what happened to her afterwards. He had never been charged in connection with her disappearance. Authorities have said that there are many wooded areas in Marshall County where Veronica's remains could be easily concealed. In fact, at the start of each hunting season, the sheriff asks local hunters to be on the lookout when traversing the wooded lands, as her body has still yet to be located. Her case remains unsolved. On Halloween in 1955, Marilyn DeMond took her 2-year-old son Stephen and 7-month-old daughter Pamela to a bakery in East Meadow, New York. While she was inside the bakery, Marilyn irresponsibly left Stephen and his sister, who was inside a carriage, to wait outside the front. When she left the bakery 10 minutes later, she was mortified to discover that both Stephen and the carriage were gone. Shortly thereafter, the carriage with Pamela still inside was discovered about 1.5 blocks away. However, Stephen was nowhere to be found. He has not been seen since. In many cases where infants are abducted, it's theorized that the perpetrator wanted a child of their own and decided to raise the missing infant under a new name. Over the years, DNA testing has been utilized in an attempt to determine if Stephen DeMond was ever given a new identity. At one point, investigators noticed that Stephen bore a resemblance to the infamous boy in the box, an unidentified child who was found murdered inside a cardboard box in Philadelphia in 1957. However, after DNA testing, all indications were that the boy in the box was not Stephen DeMond. In 2009, a Michigan man named John Barnes came forward, believing he might be Stephen, but some DNA testing also ruled this out. It's possible that an adult Stephen DeMond might be living another life somewhere under a different identity, unaware that he was once taken from his real family. It may also be a possibility that Stephen was murdered long ago, and his body was never found. Either way, his current whereabouts, dead or alive, continue to remain unknown, and at this point, will probably never be known. The first haunted house on this list is Dead of Night. Dead of Night was an attraction run by the Chamber of Horrors on Long Island, New York that closed in 2015. It was regarded as one of New York's most extreme haunted houses, and it had one of the most horrifying haunt openings many had ever seen. Everyone waited in lines, listening to a calming pre-recorded message saying, "We are here for your protection.
Everything will be okay. You are safe. We are here to protect you and care for you. We love you. Nothing is real. All is well."
Which was interrupted at intervals by an air raid siren and men in gas masks and suits who each grabbed an unsuspecting patron and dragged them into the attraction. However, you'd be lucky if you were dragged in. Some people were zipped into body bags and some were thrown over actors' shoulders and carried in. The attraction opened with this very strong abduction scenario. Then the focus shifted to humiliation, which included the smearing of strange substances on patrons' faces and even hitting people in the face with large and painfully heavy objects. Dead of Night has been discontinued from the Chamber of Horrors, but people to this day still hope to see it return. In Chicago, Illinois, there's a haunted house called Miasma, which is just as extreme, if not more extreme, than Dead of Night. Miasma is restricted to those 18 and older, and patrons may only enter alone. Patrons will be restrained, blindfolded, smeared with blood, endure heavy physical contact, and more. It's invite only, however, and patrons who receive an invite commonly describe the instructions in the email to be very vague but clear, and that was to not share the location of where they're going with anyone, to show up alone, and do not show up late. If the instructions were ever disregarded, the experience would end. All guests are asked to refrain from sharing details of the experience, making it harder to get many details about what goes on inside. But some patrons have described their experiences to involve physical pain, often leaving with claw marks on their skin, psychological torture, emotional distress, and a lot of violence. Miasma can be very physically demanding, forcing patrons to sometimes crawl through tight spaces. One patron said she at one point forgot she was in a haunted house and tapped out when it started to feel like she was genuinely in a life or death situation. The location isn't even revealed to guests until 24 hours prior, and allegedly the location always changes. Scarehouse the Basement. Underneath the regular, tamer attraction known as Scarehouse in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, used to lie what was known as the basement at Scarehouse, which was a much more intense, immersive, and interactive experience than that of the one upstairs, and it was held inside a nearly 100-year-old historic and apparently actually haunted building. It's been closed since COVID, but it's rumored to be returning soon. You may enter in pairs or alone, though odds are not many people will be entering this place alone. The actors in this haunted house are incredibly convincing, and there's a lot of improvisation and dialogue as you make your way through each scene of what's basically your own personal real-life horror movie. It's not possible to make it from start to end without coming into contact and having to deal with the actors stopping you and messing around with you. There's extreme physical contact, sexual undertones, real electric shock, religious themes, very tight spaces, and much more. Like most attractions I'll talk about in this video, you must sign a waiver before entering. The basement can get so disturbing that the attraction appropriately has a safe word to yell out if a patron happens to feel violated or too uncomfortable. The Cult was an attraction located in North Conway, New Hampshire. The Cult had been called the ultimate in terror, only for die-hard fans of true horror, for those who want the experience of real-life terror to test your fears. It was an hour-long attraction and patrons had to walk through alone. Absolutely no groups allowed. Going through it, you would encounter violent situations, and the actors would lay hands on you many times. As the nervous patrons meet a man before entering the attraction who asks if they have any problems with darkness, heights, claustrophobia, eels, rats, bugs, needles, or being fully submerged in water. Most of the patrons were already nervous of what they were getting themselves into. Patrons were given a red card on a lanyard. If one decided the experience was too much, they would give up their safety pass and it would be over. During the experience, patrons would be asked to step into a chairlift that led to a dirt path, which would then lead to a cabin where they would meet a man who would shove them into a booth, yell at them, spray them with unknown liquids, throw a bag over their heads, and then carry them outside, where the simulated torture continued. As patrons continued on, it only got worse. Throughout the attraction, patrons would encounter live animals, for example being forced to have snakes or cockroaches crawl on them, forced edibles, for example being forced to drink what the actors would claim as animal urine, extreme violence, and much more. The Cult has been closed since 2013. The Blackout Haunted House was an attraction that had two locations, one in New York and one in California. It featured extreme violence, full frontal nudity, forced edibles, submersion in water, physical contact, and patrons had to enter alone. Patrons were abducted in vans, waterboarded, and even rolled naked in a sheet of plastic and forced to walk barefoot down a hallway. Said hallway would lead to a scene with a horrifically tall figure and frail woman, and if I described the scene, this video would probably get age restricted. As a patron would pass, the tall man would stand up, exposing his body, and then threaten to make physical contact with the patron. Blackout overall relied on darkness, loud noises, violence, and sexual situations to terrify its customers. Until around 2015, it had been a solo-only experience, but starting in, I believe, 2016 or 2017, patrons were allowed to enter in groups. It seems Blackout hasn't been open for the past 2 seasons. Freakling Brothers Victim Experience 3 is a Las Vegas attraction featuring extended submersion in water, electric shock, and extreme physical contact. The Victim Experience is extremely intense, and you must go through alone. One patron said he watched a camouflaged attacker appear out of nowhere, grab his colleague by the foot, then knock her down and drag her down a long hallway as she screamed. He was left alone in the darkness until the attacker came back for him and threw him over his shoulder. Patrons will experience electric shock at some point, as well as the feeling of near drowning as they're submerged underwater for extended periods of time. As the title of the attraction suggests, once you enter, you are a victim. You will experience pain and you will be tied up, and you may be carried and thrown. Freakling Brothers actually run 3 haunted houses every year: Castle Vampire, Circus of Horrors, and Gates of Hell. The Gates of Hell became one of the first haunted houses in the country to be R-rated due to graphic content and their requirement of patrons to be over 18 and sign a waiver. The Victim Experience takes place in the Gates of Hell attraction, and it simulates what it would be believed to be like to die and actually go to hell. Without giving too much away, Victims are put in several scenes where they're touched, forced to get down on their knees, and subjected to things that anyone would find uncomfortable. The Raven's Nest was one of the lesser-known extreme haunted houses, and it's been closed since 2009. It had been closed after it was deemed as too extreme by the town. Raven's Nest featured actors who were paid to induce pain on the patrons, as well as other humiliating methods of torture. The owner, Mike McNair, would hire mostly larger and more intimidating actors who would be capable of easily picking up, tying, or shoving patrons. Visitors would also be kicked to the floor and forced to do things like lick the ground, eat disgusting foods and liquids off the floor, and even have actors try to induce vomiting in the patrons. The attraction also played with claustrophobia, having patrons crawl through air vents filled with real cockroaches and spiders, as well as constant tight and cramped rooms and pathways. There was no safe word, which may have been a small factor in the eventual closing of the Raven's Nest. Many of you definitely have heard of this last one, McKamey Manor. This San Diego attraction, if it could even be called that, shouldn't even be in the same category as regular haunted house attractions. This place tops the list because it tends to use extreme scare tactics that are off limits to professional attractions. It also can't be said that what goes on in this place is safe. Participants are covered in blood, forced to eat disgusting things, threatened with power tools, stuffed in a clothes dryer, submerged in water for extended periods, physically assaulted, and even given an unwanted haircut. Participants often leave covered in blood, commonly their own, and so far nobody has made it through to the end. There used to be no safe word, and they would only pull the plug when medically necessary. This place plays with people's fears of claustrophobia with tight spaces and corridors, people's fears of spiders with restrained victims having up to or even more than 4 tarantulas crawling over their faces, people's fears of clowns, and just about anything else you could think of. Perhaps one of the more shocking parts is that the experience can go on for up to 10 hours, obviously a big contributor to why nobody's made it through to the end yet. For a long time the place didn't have a safe word, and Russ, the owner, only added one after he was told he legally needed to. But even with this safe word, apparently the torture can go on for many people who repeatedly use the safe word, rendering it basically useless. McKamey Manor also garnered a lot of criticism regarding the $20,000 cash prize that they promised to anyone who can make it through to the end, with a lot of people believing they simply wouldn't allow anyone to win, because oftentimes the workers will decide for the patrons that they're done, even if the patron wants to keep going. McKamey Manor is self-described as a place for extreme horror lovers only, who wish to experience what true terror and gross-out torture feels like. But apparently there are a lot of people who wish to experience it, as there's a waiting list of more than 20,000 people. There's currently a Change.org petition to close down McKamey Manor for good, with over 180,000 signatures. Thousands of people shun this place for claiming to be a haunted house attraction, when they believe it's simply a torture chamber under disguise. Russ's 40-page waiver is also very questionable, and he apparently misspells the word liable multiple times to attempt to make certain points of the waiver void. Whatever your thoughts on this place are, anyone would admit it's the definition of a horror attraction that takes it way too far. This is a disturbing memory from my young childhood. I was about 7 or 8 years old. My mom would usually take my brother and I trick-or-treating, but this particular year, after school, she dropped me off at my friend Sean's house, where Sean, our friend Johnny, and I would go together. Johnny and Sean were a year older than me. We met while I was playing with my brother on the block. Johnny and Sean lived around the block from me. Sean had a weird upbringing that I never really understood. His sister was like 20 years old. There was a big gap between them. She was always his caretaker, it seemed, whenever I was at his house. His house always smelled like cat, and his sister always had a different guy over, it seemed like. His sister was always cold to me, in the sense that she'd never acknowledge me or say hi or anything. Sean's dad was never in the picture, and his mom, I believe, was always working out of town, I guess. I only met Sean's mom a few times. We never really stayed in touch for long enough for me to figure all of this out. Anyway, My mom dropped me off at Sean's, expecting that Sean's mom would be trick-or-treating with us. After saying goodbye, I went into his house. Johnny was already there. We all had big pillow sacks to fill with candy. This was around the time that I learned that neither Sean's mom nor sister were coming with us to supervise. I was young, so I sort of felt slightly uncomfortable knowing that Johnny and Sean would be leading the way, but at the same time, I felt a sense of excitement that we'd have more freedom. I knew for a fact my mom would not have approved of us going unsupervised though. So eventually, we were off into the neighborhood, walking around doing our rounds door to door. Quite a few people asked if we were alone or where our parents were, and Johnny would always be the one to use the same lie, that his mom is up ahead with his sister. It worked every time. This was on a Friday, so we didn't get to start at trick-or-treating until around 5 o'clock. But we didn't have school the next day, so we intended on going until our pillow sacks were completely full. We took a break after a couple of hours and went to Sean's, where he heated up a bunch of frozen pizzas. At the time, I was so jealous of the apparent freedom he had in his house, not having parents who cared about what he did. But looking back now, I count myself super blessed to have grown up in a household with 2 strict parents. After we hung out at his house for an hour and watched Halloween specials on Nickelodeon while eating pizza and candies, Johnny eventually was picked up by his mom, but Sean and I wanted to keep going, so we eventually headed back out for round 2. It was dark out now, and it had to be past 8 p.m. There were a lot less trick-or-treaters now. We tried to go to certain blocks we hadn't gone down yet, which meant straying further away from Sean's house. We found a block we hadn't touched yet and continued knocking on doors. Some houses didn't answer at this hour, and mostly everyone else had a comment about us being alone or how it's getting late. We noticed a man pushing a stroller a couple houses down behind us. He was walking very slowly in our direction, probably a dad trick-or-treating for his young child. As we continued going door to door, the man with the stroller got closer. Eventually, we heard him going shh and singing softly. Eventually, he caught up to us, and he said, "How's the trick-or-treating going, boys?" And we replied good at the same time. And then he said, "It's pretty late. I'm on my way back to my house. I can give you guys the rest of my candy." Sean and I looked at each other with telling faces, as if we just hit the jackpot. Sean asked what kind of candies, and he said a bunch of bags of different things. He said he didn't get to give much away because he wanted to take his daughter out for a trick-or-treat stroll. He did have a bag dangling on one of the handles of the stroller, which was filled with some candies. The stroller was fully covered by a folding piece on the top, so we couldn't see his daughter. He said she's asleep and he didn't want to wake her up, but he pointed ahead and said his house is just up this way. So we followed behind him as he pushed the stroller. He was walking a little faster now. As we walked, I realized there was next to no one else out at this point, even though it was a Friday night. It seemed like a quieter side of the neighborhood. The man talked to us as we walked, asking us questions. What part of the neighborhood we were from, where we went to school, basic stuff. I let Sean answer most of the questions. Him being even just a year older than me at that age, I felt like he was the one who should take lead. On multiple occasions as we walked, the man would lean into the stroller and talk in a high pitch to his daughter, then he'd turn back and smile at us. We finally made it to his house. He led us up the walkway with the stroller and unlocked his door. After he opened it, he brought the stroller with his daughter inside first, and then invited us to come inside. Sean led the way, so I followed. I was the one to ask if we could leave the door open, and the man paused, and then said, "Yeah, of course." He said he'll be right back as he goes to get the candy bags. He pushed the stroller into the middle of the living room, only about 10 feet away from where we were standing. I nudged Sean because I felt uncomfortable. I whispered, "Why would he leave the candy so far away?" Sean didn't respond. Instead, he turned toward the living room and then walked up to the stroller. He lifted up the folding part that was covering the baby, and he looked disturbed. He hurried back to me, whispering, "Let's go." He was full on running once we got outside, and I followed behind, which was a bit tougher because we had those heavy pillow sacks. I still was confused about what he saw, but just then, we heard a woman's voice yell, "Excuse me." It was one of his neighbors. She came running over to us and asked if we know that man, and it was at this point that Sean spilled the beans and said he offered us his leftover candy, but he was pushing a stroller with a fake baby in it. I remember getting goosebumps as he said that. The woman said, "Yeah, that man doesn't have a child. I saw you walking by with him." She took us to her car and drove each of us home. I know, getting into a stranger's car after that was another questionable move. The woman came to my front door to talk to my mom about what we just told her. My mom was distraught. After I told her every last detail about the night, she sent me to my room while my parents called the police on that man. My parents never told me anything about what happened after that. I believe they wanted to shelter me from any more exposure to the situation. My mom didn't want me going over to Sean's house anymore, and I know she had quite a bit to say to Sean's mom. I did see Sean at school once in a while still, and we'd remain cordial, but our friendship was never the same after that night. It was Halloween night, 2016. I was tasked by my parents to hand out candies to all the kids for the day. My mom bought a million bags of candy that I knew we'd have left over for weeks, and I'd be the one regrettably munching on them for days, if not weeks to come, as I was trying to lose weight. I always told my mom she went way overboard with the candies. The house was in a cul-de-sac on a dead end. We hardly got any trick-or-treaters usually. However, we did have some loyal kids who'd always come to our house knowing how much candy we'd give. Halloween was on a Monday this year. I was in college. I conveniently had Mondays and Wednesdays off this semester. So the first half of the day, I went to the gym and then worked on my assignments for class. It was always around 4 p.m. that the sound of kids outside would indicate that trick-or-treaters were out. The first time the doorbell rang was, I guess, somewhere between 4 p.m. and 5 p.m. The day went as you'd expect. There's nothing interesting about handing out candies all day to little kids and my dog Vito barking like crazy every time the doorbell rang. I'd say from the first trick-or-treater to 8 p.m., there were maybe 10 to 15 total. As I said, that cul-de-sac was out of the way for people to come. It was more effective for trick-or-treaters to pass it and just keep going straight. It being a Monday night, things quieted down much earlier than usual, I'd say. I got enough homework done, I put a dent in my projects, and so I had some of my mom's leftover stew and went to my room to watch Game of Thrones. I was literally 2 episodes in when I heard the unexpected sound of the doorbell. Vito started barking again. I looked at the clock and it had to be like 9:30. This was definitely beyond the cutoff time for trick-or-treaters. I went downstairs to the front door and opened it. On the other side of the glass storm door was a very tall man in a clown costume with a very scary-looking mask. I knew it was a man just based off the frame of the person. He was alone. He waved at me and then pointed at the brown sack he was holding. It looked basically empty. I didn't open the storm door. I just said through it, "Sorry, we don't have any more candy," and slammed the door shut. I locked it right away. I instantly regretted opening the door. I genuinely thought it was just some kid or an unfortunate mother or father who worked late and wanted to get some last-minute trick-or-treating in with their kids. Whoever I just saw on our stoop was not a kid. Hell, it didn't even look like a teenager. The frame of this person was massive, and the clown costume just made him look even bigger. Thankfully, I didn't grab the candy bag before opening the door, so he couldn't see that I was lying. I hovered by the door for a bit just to listen and see if I'd hear footsteps walking away. But not only did I not hear him walk away, he rang the doorbell again. Vito once again started going ballistic. Vito's a rat terrier. His bark is not intimidating, nor would he ever actually defend the home from an intruder. I picked him up and carried him upstairs after turning off the lights downstairs. This was my half-assed attempt at getting him to think I was absolutely never opening that door again tonight. I put Vito in my room and shut the door so he wouldn't keep barking. I stood at the top of the stairs listening, and then I heard through the front door, the storm door being forced open, like there was a loud snap implying that the latch may have been broken from force. I then heard both knocks on the front door, and then the doorknob moving around. At this point, I decided to hide my room. I was incredibly unsettled. I texted my family group chat about what was going on. No one answered though. Of course. I knew that whoever that was had to get bored. I would have texted all my guy friends asking who it was, but all my guy friends are short. I resumed the episode I was watching. I was truly just trying to pretend he wasn't there. What else was I to do? The doorbell rang once again though. This was a nightmare. I kept telling Vito to shush. I had my blinds closed too. I didn't want that fucking clown knowing what room I was in. I tried calling my dad, but he didn't pick up. I called my brother, who picked up saying he wasn't alone, and I knew that meant he was with a girl. I told him check my texts. There's some guy dressed as a clown at the door and he won't go away. My brother said it's a Halloween prank and to just ignore it. He seemed like he was in a hurry to get off the phone, so I hung up. I hoped he was right. It honestly made the most sense to be a prank. So after a few more minutes of sitting on the edge of my bed, anxious, the doorbell did not ring again. I finally felt safe to relax again and lay back down. I started drifting away slowly, so I turned off the TV to allow complete silence and darkness in the room. And very shortly after that, I drifted to sleep. I don't even think I was asleep long enough to enter REM state and have a dream when I woke up to Tito growling and quietly barking, as he would do when he was waiting for approval from one of us. I told him to be quiet, and he stopped. I looked to see what he was looking at. He was looking at the window. I listened. There was a sound coming from right outside the window. The slightest thumping sounds, and I could almost swear the sound of something rubbing on the window. My bedroom was on the second floor of the house. It's not like anyone could be outside my window, but I wondered what it was. I got up and pushed open the blind on my window, and boy was I wrong. That man dressed as a clown was at my window. All I could see was that horrific mask on the other side of the glass. He tilted his head as he looked at me, screaming my lungs out. Tito didn't even bark from what I remember, or maybe I just blocked everything else out. I ran with my phone out of my room and to my parents' bedroom, where I locked the door and dialed 911. I was too shook to even cry. My whole body was shaking and my voice was trembling as I spoke to the 911 operator. I must have asked the operator once every 20 seconds to get the police to hurry up. She'd tell me the same thing every time. They're coming as fast as they can. The police got to the house in roughly 10 minutes. They examined the exterior of the house to look for any attempted entry points. All they found was that the latch on the front storm door was broken like I figured, and leaned against the side of the house by my bedroom window was my dad's ladder. That man went into our storage shed outside and found my dad's ladder to use to climb up to my window. To avoid this going any further, I went to go sleep at my guy friend Adam's house. To this day, I don't know if this was just a sick prank purposely played on Halloween, or if there was about to be a horrible crime committed with the sick novelty of it being Halloween. It was late October, Saturday Halloween weekend. I think Halloween was on a Tuesday this year, so the big party night was the Saturday before. My friends and I were still looking for last-minute plans since everything was sold out. Ideally, we wanted to find a house party. We all had pretty funny costumes too, and we wanted to get good use out of them. My friend Kate actually decided to put on her Instagram and Snapchat stories looking for parties tonight. Not something I would have ever done. I'd find that to be kind of shameless and embarrassing, but I was glad she was willing to do it. I was surprised when she texted in the group chat that someone hit her up about a party. Pretty soon after, she sent a screenshot of the details in the group chat. It had an address, start time, and a few ground rules, such as the party would only be indoors, no backyard access, and bring your own booze. It also said must bring at least one girl for every guy. The guy who sent the details to Kate was one of our guy friends around our age, who mutually knew a lot of the same people we did. Apparently a number of people we knew were going to this party. The house address was one town over, super close. So between the four of us, we all went to Shauna's house since she had the open crib. We pre-gamed there for about an hour as we all finished up getting ready. We waited till our guy friends confirmed that they were going, then we decided to head over. We called an Uber. We all had our own drinks, varying from Four Locos to White Claws to vodka shooters. The Uber driver was probably sick of us by the end of the drive. When we got to the house, we saw a bunch of cars everywhere. The house was pretty big, a very spacious front yard. We were 4 girls walking in, so surely whoever was throwing this party was gonna love us. We didn't hear any music until we got closer to the door. Then we heard the beating of the bass. I opened the door, and the first room we were in was a cross between the living room and the kitchen. The entire house was very dimly lit, only by a bunch of orange lights hung up, definitely creating a Halloween party ambiance. The place was decently crowded, but honestly, we didn't know anyone. Kate texted the guys we knew to see if they were here yet. In the meantime, some older guy came and greeted us. He asked our names, and he said he's John, Luke's dad. Apparently, Luke was the guy throwing this party. I asked who Luke is, where he goes to school, and he replied, "Oh, he's around here somewhere, you can ask him when you see him." Then he asked us if we wanted to put our drinks in the cooler. He led us into the kitchen where there were 3 big coolers of ice. Each one already had a bunch of drinks in it. So we put some of our cans in the coolers. The John guy seemed like he was 50-something years old, which would make sense if his son was the one throwing the party, but at the same time it seemed slightly weird he'd be so welcoming and involved in such a big party in his own house. He was going around talking to everybody. Well, it seems mostly the girls. He seemed like he could have also been drunk. The 4 of us played beer pong at one of the tables, where some guys started talking to us, so we started playing them. Kate then said our guy friends were on the way, which I was happy to hear. John suddenly yelled my and Kate's names over by the counter in the kitchen. He was yelling shots. My other 2 friends, Shauna and Tracy, looked slightly offended, so I said, "Can we all have one?" And he yelled, "Yeah, sure." So we went over to the kitchen counter by him and all took a shot of tequila. I gagged because there was no lime. I was definitely starting to get drunk after this. It was odd how much the dad of the house was trying to hype this party up. He had this oddly welcoming yet unsettling presence. The unsettling part because he was much older than the generally college-age people here, and he was pushing drinks on people. Then he asked what our poison is. I wasn't going to say anything until the girls all gave their favorite drinks. John started making a bunch of mixed drinks. In the meantime, we went back to the beer pong table where the guys we were playing were still waiting. I plugged my phone into an outlet just because I was down to like 50%. Then I went back to the game. Mid-game, John came over with 2 drinks for Kate and I, and then he came back with 2 more for Shauna and Tracy. They were all in red Solo cups. He made me a vodka soda. I sipped on it during our beer pong game whenever I had a chance. I was drinking it slow because I was already drunk. After we lost to the random guys, I went to get my phone, only to realize it didn't charge at all. It was still at the same percent. The outlet wasn't working. I didn't feel comfortable leaving my phone on any other outlets, so I just refrained from killing the battery any further. Our guy friends eventually showed up, and it was soon after this point that things quickly became a blur. I mean very quickly. Like 1 second I remember talking with our friend Jeff, the next blacked out. The next thing I remember was my friends waking me up in the car outside my house. I felt woozy. My vision was blurred, my head was spinning. We were in one of our guy friends' cars. One of the guys walked me to my front door and helped me inside, then they all left. I was alone, except for my parents asleep in their room. I felt I must have drank way too much, but I also had a woozy, weird feeling in my head that I'd never felt from drinking. I felt dizzy. I went straight to my room to bed. I checked my phone, and I had some text from a random unsaved number. I opened it, and there were a bunch of texts already. It started with me texting my name, and then they responded, "John." Uh-oh. After that, he said, "You look so cute." Based on the time he sent this, it was still during the party. There was a 2-hour gap from then until he texted me again saying, "Where did my favorite girls go?" I was shocked at myself that I gave that man my number. I must have been drunker than I thought. But regardless, I lowered my head onto the pillow and fell asleep instantly. The next morning, I woke up to some disturbing texts. As my head was spinning, I read these sickening texts. After I fell asleep, I got texts from John that said, "Where are you? I'm coming to your house. You left something here." Followed by, "I'm here. Can you come to the door?" Followed by, "Hello, are you awake?" He also tried calling me 3 times. This was all at like 2 a.m. I sent the screenshot to my friends, and this was when they reminded me of what happened. John was all over me as I was increasingly becoming a zombie. My friends started getting concerned, so they pulled me away and we left the party. And just as we were leaving, 2 police cars showed up outside, presumably for a noise complaint. And as we left, everyone took note of there being no furniture in the house. It was just a big empty space filled with people and beer pong tables. One of my guy friends looked up the number somehow, and he told me it was a voice over IP number, which I didn't understand, so he just said it was a fake phone number that John texted me from. He also said that with my number, he could easily find my address. I felt even more sick now. I asked if anyone ever met his alleged son, and everyone said no. We were starting to think there was no son, and when Shauna suggested he might have roofied me, it made so much sense. I'd never before felt the way I was feeling. We decided to take this to the police. We all went to the nearest police station and reported everything, including the texts. The cop at the front desk asked if this was in relation to the house party in the vacant house last night. We were at first confused by him saying vacant house, until he explained that there was a call from neighbors about a party going on in a house that had been vacant for some time. We all looked at each other with our mouths gaping. We were all brought into an office to sit down with, I guess, a detective to take down the whole story. He took the fake phone number and said they'll try to trace this back to somebody once they get a warrant. We gave the police everything we could, and we went on our way. I blocked the fake number. I honestly felt sick over this for a while. As the days went on and nothing happened, I was confident it was over. But none of us ever heard from the police. We never heard of any arrests being made or anything. To think that man went out of his way to advertise a house party in a vacant house to have access to young women, roofied me and possibly other girls, lied about having a son, all of this. This was clearly a very, very dangerous man, and the fact that we still haven't been called in to identify anybody scares me to think he's still roaming free. This was a month ago. I'll update if things change, and I'm crossing my fingers that they do. It was Halloween weekend. It was falling on a Saturday this year. My mom always takes decorations and giving out candy very seriously. It's almost like she has to compete with the neighbors to have the most sought-after house to trick-or-treat at. We live on a corner in a regular suburban neighborhood, so when we're decorating, we also decorate the side yard of the house too. Since Halloween was a Saturday this year, kids started trick-or-treating earlier in the day. However, it was a cloudy, cold day, and there was a chance of rain in the forecast. My mom apparently couldn't understand that this may have been a factor as to why there weren't many trick-or-treaters out. Instead, after a few trick-or-treaters seemingly skipped our house, she assumed it was because there weren't enough decorations out to attract the trick-or-treaters. She told me to go get whatever containers were left in the attic containing decorations. I insisted this wasn't necessary, but she insisted otherwise and forced me to. So I went up to the attic, which is directly above my bedroom. The attic door is in the hallway upstairs. I pulled down the door and climbed up the ladder. We have the holiday containers sorted a specific way, so I went over to where the Halloween containers were. There were only a couple still left up there. I opened one to see what was inside, and said good enough. I started dragging the container out towards the attic door, then I carefully slid the container down the ladder. As I was about to climb down out of the attic, I thought I heard something on the opposite side of the attic, like a piece of wood cracking under the weight or pressure of something. I looked over to the wall of containers in the far corner. It's an attic though. The sound of wood snapping or cracking really wasn't that weird. I climbed down out of the attic and brought the decorations downstairs. From there, my mom and I put out some more decorations in the front yard. It was really windy and felt like rain at any second. There really weren't many trick-or-treaters at all. My mom was disappointed because she goes all out with the candy too. She's always been one of those people who makes a bunch of homemade goodie bags with a bunch of different candies inside. I could see how upset she was that she wasn't going to give most of them away at this rate. The day progressed, and I was in my room playing video games on my laptop, while my mom was downstairs in the living room and kitchen handing out candies to the few trick-or-treaters that would come. And then it started to rain, and that pretty much put a damper on the rest of the day trick-or-treaters wise. I was gaming in my room when I heard a crack from above my room, in the attic. Again, not really abnormal, but I made a mental note that was the second time I heard something from up there. The rest of the day was rainy, and that night it turned into a thunderstorm, perfect for Halloween night. I used to be a big gamer in my teens, and so instead of going out with friends on a Saturday night, I would often just stay in playing video games, unfortunately. This night was no exception to that. I stayed up really late into the night, past my parents, It was still raining outside. Then I heard something above me again. This time it sounded like footsteps. I was wondering if my mom was in the attic putting stuff away, but it was late at night. I sat and listened for a while. The sound stopped. I paused my game and went out into the hallway after a couple minutes, and I saw the attic door was open. I now heard noises from downstairs in the kitchen. I heard the sound of things being moved around in the fridge. My heart was racing now. I tiptoed down the hall to my parents' room and quietly opened the door. When I saw both my parents fast asleep in bed, I felt my stomach twist and I felt sick. I quietly closed the door and went up to my dad to shake him awake. He woke up easily, and I whispered to him, "There's someone in the house." He immediately sat up and said, "What?" I said, "There's someone in the kitchen right now in the fridge. I think they're hiding in the attic." My dad is not a large or confrontational man. He keeps a police baton under his bed in the case of an emergency, but I don't think he ever thought he'd have to actually use it. My dad told me to stay quiet. He went to go look out into the hall quietly. When he came back inside, he whispered that he saw someone down the hall climbing into the attic. He shut the bedroom door and he locked it and then called 911. By now, my mom was awake too, but we all stayed as quiet as possible and didn't freak out. It was now a waiting game until the police showed up. My dad went downstairs to open the front door. The attic door was now shut. The police had to go inside, and they found some homeless-looking man hiding in the corner behind that wall of containers. The sounds I was hearing were in fact from a person the whole time. The man, while seeming dirty and kind of scary looking, apparently was very straightforward and honest, that he simply walked in when he saw the front door was open the day before, and he had no place to sleep. He brought one of our blankets up there, and there was a jar of peanut butter up there too that he was eating. The whole thing is still very disturbing, and I wonder how things would have played out if I or my father confronted the man instead of the police. My parents didn't press any charges. When I was 18, I threw a house party at my parents' house for Halloween. It was closed invite, meaning I told people not to bring strangers. That was a rule my parents gave me. They were not at the house that weekend, which was why I was able to throw the party, with another rule being the place needed to be even cleaner than it was before the party. I invited around 50 people and probably around 40 ended up showing up. The party started around 6. It was starting to get dark out. It would be partially in the backyard and partially the first floor. My parents left me money for refreshments like sodas and food to leave in the kitchen for people to take. I told my parents it would be a non-alcoholic party, but I think they knew that was a load of shit. My friend who's a few years older than me brought his DJ equipment to DJ, and the party was in full swing by dark. Everyone seemed to listen and not bring strangers, because I recognized everyone. Just about everyone came up to me and greeted me after entering. I didn't drink too much because it was my party and I wanted to be somewhat responsible, but everyone else was getting drunker the later the night went. Eventually one of my friends came out of the house after getting food, and he asked who that guy in the skeleton bodysuit inside the house was. I didn't recall seeing anyone in a bodysuit costume, so I went inside the house, where there were a few people hanging out in the kitchen. I asked if they saw someone wearing a skeleton bodysuit, and someone told me yeah, it seemed like he was snooping around the house. I grew concerned when I heard this, and I asked if anyone invited him or knew who it was. No one inside knew him. I looked around the house and then found him. He was walking down the stairs. I asked, "Who are you?" And he said, "Mike, I was using the bathroom upstairs." It was a really deep voice. He sounded older. His frame was also a bit larger. Not like muscular, just a stockier looking build. I asked, "Who invited you?" And he said, "Tom." I didn't know a single Tom, so I asked, "Who's Tom?" Then I just asked him if he could take his mask off. He didn't listen or even respond. He just walked past me towards the front door, then he left. I ran upstairs to check if any of the rooms had been gone through, and if anything had been stolen. All the doors upstairs, except for the bathroom door, were closed, and after a quick look, it seemed nothing was stolen. So I went to lock the front door, and then I told a bunch of my friends about how weird that just was. I went outside to ask a few friends if they knew who invited the skeleton guy, and not a single person knew who it was. Eventually, I gave it a rest. The party was winding down around midnight. Most people were starting to leave. A few close friends stayed behind a little later to help clean up. After all was said and done, it was a successful party. When everyone was gone, I started getting ready for bed. One of my friends, Vinny, stayed over on the couch downstairs. After brushing my teeth and changing into pajamas, I decided to go hang out with Vinny in the living room for a while. We had some drinks and just watched funny YouTube videos on TV. My little sister, who was 14, was asleep by now. She didn't hang outside with the party because she was too young. We were being quiet so as not to wake her, but when Vinny and I both heard noises from upstairs, it seemed that we woke her up. I was expecting the sounds, which sounded like footsteps, to move to the bathroom or something. I got a little confused when I never heard my sister's door open. I decided to go upstairs just to check on her. I knocked on her door and she didn't answer. I opened it a crack and saw that she was sleeping. So what were those sounds I was hearing then? I went to my parents' room and realized the door wasn't clicked shut. I was able to just push it open without twisting the doorknob, which was odd because I made sure their door was closed before the party. I looked inside the room without turning on the lights. Then, as I backed out of the room, I looked through the crack of the door, and on the other side, I saw that guy in the skeleton bodysuit. I made no mistake, I knew what I was looking at. I'm impressed with myself for not running or screaming. I pretended I didn't see him and pulled the door closed. Then I went downstairs and told Vinny that the guy from before is in the house. I had him call 911 and tell them that there's an intruder in the house, while I tiptoed back upstairs to my sister's room, went inside, and shook her to wake her up. I explained to her what was going on and made sure she would be quiet while following me downstairs. She did a good job not freaking out either. When we were downstairs, we met Vinny in the kitchen by the back door, where we went outside to the backyard. Then we cut through the side to the front and went to our neighbor's house, ringing the bell at least 3 times. Our neighbor let us wait with him for the police, but at some point before the police got there, that guy escaped through our parents' bedroom window. I know because the window was now open. Their closet door was also open, where my dad keeps his safe. It's as if it were someone who knew about the safe being there that tried breaking into it or just taking the whole safe out from the floor. It was obvious how the man broke in. He simply just walked into the party again. It could have been any number of people though. We never found out who it was, but it was someone who knew I was having a party, someone older, and someone who knew about my parents' safe. My sister ended up telling our parents about it, and obviously that was the last party I was ever allowed to throw at their house. This happened in 2016, when I was 15. This would be my last year trick-or-treating on Halloween, so I wanted to make it a big occasion. My mom is pretty laid back, so it turned into a huge multi-day thing for me. The day before Halloween, I would have a sleepover with my friends Davis and Zach, skip school the next day on Halloween, trick-or-treat with Davis and Zach, and then have a sleepover with just my girlfriend Amber and I. This story carries into both nights, so I'll try to explain the best I can. My basement had just gotten renovated into a man cave, so obviously my friends and I wanted to stay down there for the night. The basement had a long hallway right to the man cave. The light switch to the hallway didn't work. It had a pretty creepy vibe, but for tonight, that would be a good thing. My mom made us cookies and then we went down into the cave. It was around 11 p.m. and we had just finished watching the original Scream. Our second movie of the night would be Paranormal Activity, which none of us had watched before, and that's why I picked it. I remember pausing the movie not even 30 seconds in because of the motion-detected light in the backyard turning on. It lit the whole room up, ruining the creepy vibe we had going. So I waited for the 30-second timer so it would turn off, and then unpaused the movie. Then after about another 30 seconds, the light went off for a second time, and I started getting annoyed. Davis asked me what kept making it turn on, and I said I had no clue. 30 more seconds passed by, and the light turned off again, and I played the movie again. It was at this point I wanted to know what the hell was going on, and so I asked for Davis and Zach to come upstairs with me so I could see what it was. They agreed and went up the stairs to look through my back door. By the time we got there, the light in the backyard had turned off, so it was hard to see. We stood for 5 minutes waiting for something to happen, but nothing ever did. We went back down to the den and decided to turn off the movie for the night and just sit on our phones and talk. We weren't really invested in it anyway. About 2 hours later, everyone was asleep except for me. I was just scrolling on my phone when the familiar glow of the motion light came through the window for now the 4th time. I was exhausted though, and so I figured it was just another group of kids trying to prank us or something. But the more I thought about it, the less it made sense. I figured I would check the backyard one last time, and just like I thought would happen, no one was out there. I gave up, so I went back down to the den and called it a night. The next night came in the blink of an eye, and next thing I knew, I had a bag full of candy. I felt kind of sad. In a way, this was like my childhood ending. However, I figured I should just try and enjoy the night and not reminisce. At this point, I still had lingering thoughts about the previous night, whether I should tell Amber or not. She was scared of everything, and I didn't want to ruin a night with her over a story. We were at one of our last houses on the route we took, when Amber let out a loud yell in pain. We asked what happened, and then she told us that she had a rock thrown at her. I turned around to find some guy in a clown mask standing around 15 feet behind us. This was amid the clown epidemic. I told him to get lost, but he just stood there. I analyzed him a bit more and realized this guy looked like a grown man. He only had a clown mask on also. The rest of his quote-unquote costume was just normal clothes. We kept walking, but all the man did was stand there. It was at this point we called it a night and skipped the last few houses out of anxiety. We went back to my house so my friends could get picked up. And just like that, it was just my girlfriend and I looking at candy on the floor in the den. She asked if we could watch a movie, and so I decided that I would just turn on Paranormal Activity again later that night to finish it. I remember the scene in the movie perfectly. It was Mika walking around to find his girlfriend, when suddenly the screen went black, and the dimmed lights in the cave turned off. My girlfriend and I looked at each other. I realized the power went out. This immediately made me start to get paranoid. The power had never gone out in this house unless there was a storm. I checked my weather app and it said it was normal conditions that night, not even a little bit of rain. I told Amber to stay in the cave, but she felt scared down there, so she decided to come upstairs with me to see what was going on. The generator to the house was in the backyard, and that's when I got the terrible feeling in my stomach. The thoughts of last night creeping back to me, and this time I didn't have Davis and Zach with me, and Amber wasn't very strong. All the worst thoughts came to my mind as I opened the sliding door to the backyard. All I heard was crickets chirping. I figured that maybe I was just overthinking. Amber and I passed by the motion light, which didn't kick on now. I was about 5 feet from the generator when I thought I heard a twig snap. Amber and I looked towards the forest on the far side of the yard with the only sounds being crickets. But we felt like we were being watched. I almost felt like I had to throw up. I decided we'd rather stay in the house with no lights on than be out here. I didn't want to be outside any longer. Amber started making her way inside, and that's when I saw him. The same guy in a clown mask, standing to the side of my shed. We just stared at each other for a while, like he was trying to scare us. And then he suddenly jumped forward and started sprinting at us. I ran to the back door and slammed it shut after Amber. We ran down into the cave, and we got behind the bar in the corner of the room. That's when I realized I never locked the back door, and we heard a slam from upstairs. Now everything was silent in the man cave. Amber started texting 911 because she was too scared to talk. She explained that there was a man in the house. Minutes felt like hours. It must have been like 10 minutes tops, and the sound I had been dreading to hear came. The basement door opening. I heard footsteps come down the stairs and down the hallway. My girlfriend was breathing too loud. I had to cover her mouth. I heard footsteps come towards our direction and stop. I was starting to think my only option might be to fight if he finds out where we were. I grabbed a beer bottle from behind the bar and prepared myself mentally to fight if I had to. The room stayed silent for quite a while, but then we heard sirens come from outside. I realized this was the perfect distraction and moment to strike. In a fraction of a second, I got up, ran at him, and swung at his head with the bottle, but I tripped and fell after I swung and I hit the ground. I looked up to see that man with the clown mask from earlier. I think his mask somewhat blocked my swing because he barely flinched. I realized this was a stupid idea because it seemed like he was about to go back upstairs after hearing the sirens anyway. He looked down at me on the floor, I was about to yell at Amber to run as I laid on the floor, scrambling to get up. My legs felt numb, and I realized my life could potentially end right now, but the police could be heard outside. The man stared for another moment before running up the stairs, and then we heard the back door open and slam again. I ran upstairs to let the police in and told them he went out back. And of course you're wondering, the answer is no, the police somehow never caught this guy to my knowledge. I can't go down to that man cave alone anymore without feeling anxious, even to this day, so we would hang out at Amber's for a while after that. There's nothing I can do but look back and be grateful that we're still alive. I'll never forget that feeling of looking up and seeing that clown mask staring down at me as I flailed on the ground. It was October 1st. That fresh autumn breeze was in the air. It felt like fall, my favorite season. It was my boyfriend Carter and I's first fall living together in our new home. I wanted to surprise Carter by decorating the place with fall and Halloween-themed decorations before he got home from work one day. I thought it would be cute. I bought a few things from a nearby Marshall's and a few other stores, and I also looked on different apps and websites, most notably Facebook Marketplace. I simply typed in fall decorations, and one listing really caught my attention. It was a picture of a big green plastic container, which contained a bunch of fall decorations. I clicked on it for more details, and more or less it said everything must go, entire container of fall-themed decorations for sale for cheap. The price was only $20. It was a steal if that entire big container was full of decorations. At the bottom of the ad, it also said, selling other stuff, clearing out house, everything must go. Check my profile. So I clicked his profile and looked at some of the other listings he had. There was a weird assortment of things this guy was selling. An allegedly new iPhone for $700, a few articles of women's clothing, and Christmas decorations. There were others, but I didn't go through all of them. The profile itself was kind of low-key. Everything was private. The man's name was Cody, and his profile picture was a close-up of a gray trucker's cap on a guy's head, but his face was covered by the brim of the hat. The cover photo was a blurry photo of a lake. I messaged the profile, and he replied instantly. I asked what kind of decorations were in the container, and he said all sorts. Tableware, outdoor decorations, etc. So I excitedly told the man I would come by them today if he were available. He confirmed he would be around later on, closer to 9 p.m., as that's when he'd get home from work. He sent me an address. I looked up the address on Google Maps Street View. It was not in the best town, honestly, but the house looked completely normal. 2 cars in the driveway in the Street View picture, lawn kept nice, so I agreed to meet. I had my friend Sally come with me just to be safe. I went to pick up Sally across town, and we were off to this Cody person's house. It was a half-hour drive. Sally and I had some time to catch up on the drive there. When we got off the highway entering the town that the house was in, Sally started half joking around about how sketchy the area was. I say half joking around because I know she was saying that partially to be funny and make light of the situation, but also because everyone just kind of knows this really isn't the best town. It was dark out though, so honestly we didn't see much besides streetlights, traffic lights, and some storefronts. As we got closer, I saw my phone screen turning on as it vibrated in the cup holder of my car. At the next light, I checked my phone and saw that it was messages from Cody on Messenger. He said, "When you get here, you can come right in." I showed it to Sally and she said, "What the hell?" We both could agree that that was a bit uncomfortable and that we'd ring the doorbell anyway. We pulled up to the house and surprisingly, there were no cars in the driveway. There were dim lights on in the house though that could barely be seen through the closed blinds of the windows. I messaged Cody back saying, "We're here, can you come to the front?" Sally and I both watched the house as I waited for a response. And then we both noticed at the same exact time, at one of the windows, the blinds slightly shift, indicating someone was watching us through them. Then, just as quickly as we noticed it, the opening in the blinds closed. A few seconds later, the front door opened, and Cody messaged me back saying, "I'm at the door, you can come in." It was a bit of an unsettling situation, and and I was just happy I brought Sally along. The two of us got out of my car and walked closer to the front door. Before getting too close, I called out Cody's name a few times, only to get no response. Sally whispered we should leave. I took a few steps closer and said Cody one more time really loud, and there was no response. I turned and whispered, "Let's go," and we started walking back to the car, when suddenly I heard a guy say, "Hey, yes, I'm here, inside." We turned and saw a man at the doorway, but only about half of him. He was like peering only half of his body around the door. He waved us inside. Sally and I cautiously turned back and started walking back to the door. As I got closer, he fully opened the door, but then also walked out of view. We walked up the steps and into the house, keeping the front door open, and right away got hit with a strong scent, like that cotton scent from an old person's house mixed with something very unpleasant. We heard fast and heavy footsteps moving away into another room, followed by his voice saying, "It's over in here, come here." His voice was freakishly deep, like it was intimidating. I made sure Sally was right by my side before entering the adjacent room. We were faced with a very weird sight. A dimly lit living room with a depressing pinkish red carpet and really old-looking furniture. But the smell in this room was putrid. It smelled like actual death. In the middle of the room was a red container with a green lid on top of it. There was this Cody man standing just over the container. This was the first time I got a good, clear look at the man, and he was not a friendly-looking man. He invited me over to come open the container. I took note of the fact that this container was not the same color as the green container that was in the picture on the Facebook ad. It also was a completely different shape from the looks of it. I asked him to open it himself, and he said, "Well, you're no fun." That comment already had Sally and I inching backwards in the direction of the front door. But when he lifted the lid off the container and we were suddenly blasted with another putrid smell, we turned for the door and left in a hurry without looking back until we got to the car. Sally kept telling me to hurry up. By the time my car was on, all I know is the front door to the house was already closed. I don't know if he was watching us through the window again. We were gone very quickly. We never actually saw what was in that container. It was definitely not decorations, though. After telling Carter about all of this, he asked for the address of the place, and I told him not to go there. He assured me he wouldn't, he just wanted to look up the house, so I gave it to him. The next day, he returned home later than usual from work, and he told me he stopped by the house, and an older woman answered the door, insisting that she lives there alone. He knew I wasn't lying though, because I showed him all the Facebook messages with the guy, which included the address. Upon looking up the records of that address, it does list the owner as a woman in her late 60s. This was an incredibly disturbing and unexplainable experience. From now on, when buying stuff online, I avoid going to people's houses. It was 2019 when this happened. I remember specifically because it was the year I was living on my own in Asheville, North Carolina. I moved here for a temporary job, and it was an excuse for me to live on my own for the first time. I was 22 years old and just out of college. I had an apartment in downtown. I could walk to most things I needed, but I also had my car for when I wanted to branch out or venture out of town. The thing I loved about Asheville and North Carolina in general was the sheer amount of hiking trails. I'd been to many around town, but one I hadn't been to was DuPont State Forest. One day I decided to go. The drive was just under an hour from Asheville. It was a random Wednesday in October. The leaves were starting to change, and it was the perfect time for a hike. I didn't have work that day, and it being a work day for everyone else, it meant I'd probably have the trails all to myself. I got to the parking area for the park, and I found where one of the trails began. I walked for a while, and the trail was serene. I was the only one out there that day. It was a cloudy day, and we'd been getting a lot of rain that week, which was more of a reason I wanted to go, because the trail would lead to some nice waterfalls called Triple Falls and High Falls, and the waterfalls would be more impressive after a few days of rainfall. I only had to hike about 0.4 miles before getting to the Triple Falls, which was a really cool sight. A little piece of trivia, a scene in the Hunger Games was filmed at this waterfall. I took a few videos and pictures as I sat on a rock for a bit. I noticed a woman in the woods on the trail. She was looking at me. I waved at her, trying to be polite. Then she just turned around and slowly walked deeper into the woods until she was out of sight. Not really something I gave a second thought to. Anyway, I wasn't tired yet. I had literally just started hiking, so I didn't sit for too long. I got up and headed back to the trail. I didn't want to try climbing the rocks of the waterfall because they were incredibly slippery. I continued to ascend up the trail and eventually came to the higher point of the falls called High Falls. I took a few more videos and pictures here and sat on another dry rock for a bit. I swear I felt a sense of deja vu when I saw that woman again in the woods by the trail. Once again, she was staring me down. I didn't wave this time. I instead looked down at my phone, pretending not to notice or care. I couldn't help but glance up after like 10 seconds, and now she was gone. If I had to guess, the woman was like 55. She had short, grayish blonde hair from the looks of it. But again, she was pretty far away, so this was all just what I saw of her from a distance. I didn't see which way she went, but whatever way it was, I wanted to go the opposite. I kept walking the direction I'd been walking, and eventually came to another landmark of the trail, the covered bridge. I once again stopped here to take a scenic video and a few photos. I drank a bit of my water, and then looked at the end of the bridge from the side I had just walked from. I saw that woman. I swear I didn't see her there before I started taking videos and pictures. I also didn't hear anyone walking behind me. She was once again staring right at me as if I were doing something wrong. I was getting annoyed. I started walking over to her and said, "Excuse me," but she just turned around and started walking away. Actually, the speed at which she was walking away for someone at her age was unsettling. I almost felt concern at the possibility that she may have been somebody with special needs that needed help, but I didn't convince myself to go chasing after her. I just leaned on the edge of the bridge for a few minutes before deciding to turn back. I had already been hiking for about 45 minutes, and it would take another 45 to get back down to the car. Walking back down the trail I came, in the direction that woman had gone, I passed a younger woman walking her dog. So I decided to stop her and ask if she'd seen an older woman pass by. She said no, and just trying to make conversation about it, talk to somebody about it, I told her how I kept seeing that woman popping out of nowhere and looking at me, then just walking off. She laughed and said that's really strange. I didn't want to take up too much of her time, so after we both shared a laugh about it, I continued on my way. The entire way down the trail, I grew a bit paranoid that I'd see that woman lurking around in the background somewhere again, but all was quiet on the way down. I passed one other person who gave me a friendly smile and a nod. Other than that, I made it back to my car undisturbed. Later that day, I went on a date with a girl I was seeing there. We went to our favorite local bar to get some pumpkin spice beers and watch baseball. I told her about the woman on the trail, and she found it amusing, because honestly it did sound funny. After that, I went home. Fast forward to that night when I was in bed. I hardly ever wake up in the middle of the night. I'm a pretty heavy sleeper normally, so me waking up in the middle of the night in the dark was unusual. I was still coming to when I heard something at the foot of my bed. I looked up and saw the figure of a woman at the foot of my bed. I felt as though my insides had just fallen out of my body. I started screaming so loud that I'm sure my neighbors could have heard it, even with the windows closed. I started crawling against my headboard, trying to distance myself as much as possible from the female figure at the foot of my bed. Then she just turned and walked out of the room. I stopped screaming now, more so trying to just catch my breath and slow my rapidly beating heart. I flicked on the lamp and started shouting, "Who's there?" I listened, but there was dead silence. I grabbed the knife I had in the nightstand next to my bed and jumped out of bed. I flicked on every light switch I passed until the entire apartment was lit up. There was no one there. Not in the closets, not behind a couch, not under any beds, and so I called my father. I didn't know what else to do. I needed to share what just happened with somebody. My father groggily picked up the phone, and after explaining to him, he said I must have hallucinated it while I was still in my half-asleep state. He said I wasn't fully awake yet, and so I could have been seeing things. I knew deep down he was probably right, but it didn't make the image I saw any less real-looking or horrifying. And then I told him about the woman in the park, and how the figure at my bed actually resembled her. He said if anything, that further proves his point that my brain conjured up a familiar image from earlier that day. Somehow, I went back to sleep that night, with my bedroom door barricaded with my dresser just in case. It wasn't until 2 days later that I heard from my mom that her sister in Germany died. I'd never met my aunt. She'd been basically estranged from my mom, as she hadn't left Germany in over 25 years. My mom and uncle flew to Germany to attend the funeral, and it wasn't until she got back home and I saw the prayer card with my aunt's face on it that once again I felt like my organs dropped out of my body when I realized she looked identical to the woman I saw on the trail that day and hallucinated at the foot of my bed. This story shook my whole family, especially because I told my dad about all of it and the hallucination before we even got news of my aunt's passing. I was born a Catholic, but never found myself to be super religious after confirmation. But goddamn, does this really send shivers down my spine and make me question what exactly I believe in. My friend Carlos and I like to do stupid things together. We've been friends since we were 10, and when we were 21, we became roommates. We lived in Brunswick, Georgia, where we grew up. A little coastal town that had its pros and cons, but overall was an okay place to grow up. But it got boring as we entered our 20s. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. While we did live there, we knew about a creepy looking house that differed from the rest of the houses in town, in that it looked like it was built in a different century. It had long been abandoned, and we and our friends would make up stories about its history. It was mid-October, and everyone was in Halloween mode. People were doing Halloween-themed activities like haunted houses and corn mazes and such. We thought it would be fun one Friday night to go break into that house and explore. So after we were both home from our jobs, we both grabbed baseball bats to bring with us, stopped for some fast food and beers on the way, and drove to the house. We parked all the way down the road just not to be suspicious. The houses around there were not that close together, so each property was pretty big, which meant we were less likely to get caught snooping around. We both grabbed a couple beers each and threw them in our backpacks. Not sure why we thought we were going to drink in there, but along with that, we stuffed our baseball bats into the sides, just so no one would see us walking around with baseball bats in our hands late at night looking like trouble. We quietly walked down the street, just whispering to each other. It took less than 5 minutes to get to the house. It was so dark on this part of the street because this house, along with the house across the street, had no lights on. There weren't any street lights on the street. Whatever light there may have been would have had to come from one of the few houses with their lights on. From here on, we used our flashlights we brought. The front lawn had a bunch of dirt patches, and the patches of grass were overgrown. Lots of weeds everywhere, it seemed. We walked around to the backyard to look for an entry point because doing that out front seemed stupid for obvious reasons. Shockingly, the back door was already unlocked. The place wasn't boarded up or anything. The back windows weren't even smashed. We knew that the place was abandoned though, everybody did. We walked right in. Navigating inside of there would have been impossible had it not been for our flashlights. The house was bigger than some of the neighboring houses, yet the inside felt very cramped. Like there were a lot of rooms, but they were smaller, almost giving the house a maze-like feeling. Carlos stepped into another room away from me, and at that moment I was alone. I heard his voice say from another room, "Yo, there's still furniture everywhere." I responded, "Yeah, this place must have been abandoned in a hurry." Everything seemed ancient, like furniture in my grandma's house, only not used in years. I walked around the first floor some more, and came to a tiny corridor with a few doors that led to bedrooms. I entered one of the bedrooms, and it was incredibly cramped. The bed took up 80% of the room. I went through some of the drawers in the dresser, but they all seemed like they'd already been gone through. Same with the closet. Anything left behind besides this old furniture just looked like junk. I heard Carlos say he's going upstairs. I said back, okay. We were speaking at a volume that was just loud enough for each of us to hear. After checking out the other bedroom down on the first floor, which was equally cramped, I went back out to the corridor. There were 2 other doors, one that led to a bathroom, and then when I opened the final door, I was looking down a long stairway to a basement. I decided, fuck it, I'm walking down. I started descending the steps, each step squeaking and cracking under my weight. I got about halfway down the steps when I realized there was a faint glow coming from down there. I turned off my flashlight, and yes, there was still a little faint glow coming from down there. I should have turned and left in that moment like any normal person, but I do stupid things. Like I die first in a horror movie most likely. I continued down the stairs with my flashlight off, and when I got to the bottom, I looked around the walls separating the stairs from the rest of the basement, and I saw what was just barely lighting up the room. It was 2 tall candles sitting on a table, but that wasn't the first thing I noticed. What I saw first was what was next to that, and it was some kind of sofa rocking chair, and it was rocking. Someone was seated in it. It was facing away from the stairway. All I could see was a hand on one of the arms of the chair. I had to get out of there. I started going back up the stairs as quietly as I could, with each crack and squeak causing me to cringe in fear. I was halfway up the stairs now. I looked back down and could still see the faint glow of the candles, so I continued as quietly as I could. I was almost to the top, and one stair creaked especially loud. I paused for a moment, clenching my teeth so hard. I proceeded up the final steps and made it to the top. I turned to shut the door, but I noticed it was pitch black down there now. The thought of the candles having been put out sent a shiver down my spine. I quietly closed the door, and then I tiptoed around this cramped maze of a house until I found the stairway going upstairs. I stood at the bottom of the stairs and quietly called up to Carlos. He wasn't responding. I sighed and started quietly going up the stairs, repeating Carlos's name. Still no response. I had to go all the way up to the top of the stairs, repeating his name, and he still wouldn't respond. So I said, "If you're trying to scare me, stop joking around. There's someone in the basement. We need to get out of here." That got his attention because he stepped out from a dark room and asked if I was serious. I told him I'd explain outside, but that I'm not kidding. He followed me down the stairs. I was trying less so to be quiet now because I just wanted to get out of that house. We were heading back to the back door where we entered, but when we passed the corridor with the basement door, we both saw the silhouette of a man standing in front of the door. The time for sneaking around was over. I kept repeating just go as we booked it outside and ran for my car. We made it to the car in like 30 seconds. I was already winded by the time we made it back. I backed the car off that street and started driving us home. In the car ride was when I explained in detail what I saw. All Carlos kept saying was, "Yo, what the fuck?" to everything I said. He was in just as much disbelief as me. So while no, I don't think anyone legally lived in that house, I do think someone was squatting in there, down in that basement. Who knows who it was? Honestly, who cares? I just never returned anywhere near that street. It was a rainy Thanksgiving. We have a small family, so our family gatherings are tiny. It was my mom, my 2 sisters, our grandparents, and I for dinner at my mom's house. My older sister Nancy has been moved out for years. My younger sister Jamie and I still live at home with our mom. Our grandparents live 20 minutes away. Our dad's side of the family all live in a different town. We were all helping out with cooking and such, and our grandma was bringing over some food as well. We always do Thanksgiving dinner at 6 o'clock sharp. Our grandparents arrived at like 5 o'clock. We had to go out and help them walk through the rain up the front stoop to make sure they didn't slip. It was really bad out. Once they were here, we put the football game on in the living room, and I sat with my grandparents and watched football with my grandpa, who's a big Cowboys fan. My sisters were in the kitchen helping my mom with the food. The rainstorm created for a more comfortable and relaxing Thanksgiving evening. That is, at first. When it was time to set the table, I went to help. We were all at the table by 6 o'clock as per the usual. We had a giant selection of food for the small amount of people we were. Turkey, leg of lamb, potatoes, stuffing, corn, cranberry sauce, cornbread, and more food I'm probably forgetting. We were all at the table eating, drinking wine, and talking before we migrated to the living room, where there we all watched the football game. Then, sometime before the game ended, the doorbell rang. It was still pouring outside, and we weren't expecting anyone else. Our mom said, "Oh no, what if that's your father?" Long story short, our parents don't speak, but the idea of our father coming to surprise us wasn't impossible. My mom told me to go check who it was, so I went to the door and yelled through it, "Who is it?" But the sound of the pouring rain on the front awning drowned out the sound of a male's voice on the other side. So I opened the door, with the storm door still closed and locked. There was a black man on the other side of the door. He was in some really big rain jacket with the hood up. When I opened the door, he walked closer and yelled something through the door. I had to ask him to repeat it twice before I understood him to be asking for food, saying he's hungry. Then he said something along the lines of, "The Lord will give you good karma if you spare some food." I said 1 second. I went to the living room and told my mom there's a possible homeless or just very hungry man asking for food at the front door. My mom said close the door, while my grandma said give him some food. I said I'll make a little paper plate of food for him from the leftovers. I went to the kitchen, grabbed a bunch of paper plates to account for the rain outside ruining them, and then sandwiched some of the leftovers together with them. Then I went to the front door where the guy was still standing. I held up the plate to show him, and he tried opening the door. I yelled, "Wait, it's locked." But I already was wary now after he tried opening the door. Regrettably, I still unlocked the door, and the second I started to push it open, he pulled it open with force and tried pushing his way through me. I instantly threw the food and held him back, yelling for my sisters to come help me. As Nancy came to help shut the door, I saw 2 more guys rushing up the front walkway to the door. I managed to push the man out enough to clear the door, and I helped my sister slam it shut. The second it was locked, I ran to the backyard door to make sure it was locked. I was the only able-bodied man in the house, and I felt like it was on me to protect the house. My family was in hysterics as we were brainstorming what to do. Not so shockingly, we settled for calling the police. My mom called while I kept going from window to window looking outside. It was hard to see out through the pouring rain, but through the backyard window, I saw a couple men running through the grass to the back door. I'd imagine they tried opening the back door and failed, and then I saw them running through the grass again back to the gate. Then they were gone. When the police got here, the food that I dropped onto the front stoop was still just sitting there, all scattered on the porch. Not that it wasn't obvious that those guys didn't come for the food, but it's something worth mentioning. Our Thanksgiving was almost turned into a complete nightmare if it weren't for my and my sister's quick reactions. I know my grandma had her heart in the right place, wanting to help the seemingly needy, and I was influenced by her. But unfortunately, we live in a world where sometimes trying to do the right thing could bite you in the ass. We installed the doorbell camera soon after this. It was Thanksgiving night. I was over at my parents' house for dinner since they were hosting this year. I got to see some cousins and uncles I hadn't seen in almost a year. We had a typical Thanksgiving gathering for our family. My parents cooked a big meal as usual. Before dinner, though, I got a long essay of a text from some unknown number. I won't share it because it contains a lot of personal revealing details, but it started with, "Hey Melissa, hope your Thanksgiving is going well." Then I quickly came to realize who it was that sent this text. It was this crazy stalker guy named Kevin who I'd never even met before. We matched on a dating app and texted and snapped for a while, but we never met. He gave me obsessive vibes, and when I politely rejected going on a date with him, saying I don't think we have much in common, he got even more obsessive and aggressive. He even threatened me one time when I posted a Snap story of my friend and I getting drinks, because he thought I was on a date with a guy. That was when I blocked him on everything, Snapchat, Instagram, and his number. But the contacts didn't stop there. I'd get random Instagram accounts with 0 followers attempting to follow me, and I'd block them each time. Same thing on Snapchat, I'd get random accounts adding me with different guys' names every time. Whenever I'd add them back out of curiosity, their Snap scores were always 0. After reading the entire message, I was disgusted. He was gaslighting me and borderline threatening me. I replied, "If you keep contacting me, I will go to the police." I took so long to form a reply I was okay with that my grandma got annoyed and asked me to put my phone away. It was only out of sight and out of mind for maybe half an hour before I got another text from another random number. It was another essay. I didn't want to completely ruin my mood and be on my phone dealing with this when I was with family. I put my phone away and just tried to focus on being a part of the conversation. When family started to leave and things started to slow down, I checked the text, and it was disturbing. It was longer than the first one, and it was him berating me and insulting me the entire time, acting like the entitled, narcissistic sociopath that he clearly is. When there was just a small amount of my family left, I showed them the texts, and they were appalled. My mom wanted me to go to the police the next day to report him for harassment, which I planned on doing. I soon left my parents' house to go home to my apartment. My apartment is the lower floor of a two-family house. My friend Chelsea is my roommate in the apartment. I got home before her, and I went straight to my room to look for Christmas movies to watch. My phone started ringing, and it said unknown caller. I knew it was him. I denied it and silenced my phone. I put on some silly rom-com Christmas movie to fall asleep to. It was called Surviving Christmas. All I remember about it is that it had James Gandolfini in it. It was late at night, so I didn't plan on making it through the movie. I was getting sleepy halfway through the movie when I heard walking from outside my room in the house. It was in the apartment, not from upstairs, so I assumed it was Chelsea getting home from her night with her family. The footsteps came straight to my door. Then someone attempted to open my door. I always lock my bedroom door at night, even though I trust Chelsea. It's just a natural habit I have. I paused the movie and listened as the doorknob turned a few more times. Before I yelled, "Chelsea?" Then it stopped. I heard quiet footsteps walking away from the door. I grabbed my phone, about to call Chelsea, and I saw a bunch of texts on my screen from a third random number. The most alarming one was a threat saying, "Good thing you made it obvious where you live." I tried calling Chelsea like 5 times, but she never picked up. I called my parents a bunch of times until my dad picked up. I whispered into the phone that I think that crazy stalker was in the house. My dad said to stay put. He was coming over right away. We lived 10 minutes away from each other, but he made it to me in 5. That's how fast he drove here. During that time, I stayed on the phone with my dad the whole time until Chelsea called me back. And that's when she told me that she wasn't coming back to the apartment tonight, so it for sure was not her. When my dad got here, the front door was locked. I had to let him in. I swore to him that I wasn't imagining what happened, and so after we tore the place upside down, he went to the big sliding window by the kitchen, big enough that anyone could fit through, and he lifted it open. He turned to me and gave me a stare of disappointment. He scolded me after learning that I didn't lock the windows every night, and said, "Here's my answer on how someone got in here." I went back home with him and slept at home that night. First thing in the morning, my dad took me to the county court's office where they gave us step-by-step instructions for getting a temporary restraining order. Skipping most of the legal process of this story, I eventually did see Kevin in person when I had to go to court to get the restraining order extended. The judge granted the extension, and though I could never prove he broke into my apartment, his threatening texts were plenty, and if he ever contacts me again through any outlets, he'd be arrested. This was a truly dangerous man, and I hope he hasn't found anyone else to harass. Most of my family lives in a rural part of Central Florida, closer to the East Coast though. My Uncle Ben was hosting Thanksgiving one year. His house sits on a huge lake with like 5 other houses, that's it. I don't want to give the name of the lake or the town because that would be doxing my uncle basically. It's not a fancy house and setup like you're picturing, trust me. It's rustic, but private and spacious. My uncle is a bit of a redneck, but he makes our holiday gatherings more fun. Him hosting Thanksgiving this year meant that he'd be going all out, making it like a party basically, with music, cornhole, coolers full of beers, and all of that good stuff. We got to his house around 3. During the day, we all drank some beers, ate some snacks like chips and dip, and played drinking games together. Card games, cornhole, and even basketball with my cousin. Though the basketball didn't last long with 3 beers and a bunch of chips in our stomachs. This all went on for a few hours with music blasting. An unusual way of celebrating Thanksgiving, I know. Then as it started getting darker around 5:30, Aunt Mel and Uncle Ben started bringing the food out to the table. They set the table up under the big gazebo. It was around sunset when everything was set up and we were all eating. The gazebo has lights, so when it got really dark, the lights turned on. By 6 o'clock, it was basically pitch black out. My uncle's probably the only one alive who insists on doing Thanksgiving dinner outside, but we all enjoy it. It makes it more fun. The fun soon ended though. My cousin suddenly pointed out past me to the woods, saying, "Dad, who's that?" Uncle Ben turned around and said, "Who the hell?" There was someone standing out in front of the woods like a statue, watching us eat. Uncle Ben stood up and started walking over to the guy standing by the woods. and then he yelled, "Can I help you with something?" I'd say he was about halfway to the woods when the guy turned around and ran into the woods. Uncle Ben turned around and laughed. He was definitely drunk by this point, finding humor in this. He said must be one of the local nuts as he came back to the table to sit. My Aunt Mel was not as amused, and I kind of agreed with her. That was creepy. My dad joked that between all the men here, there's nothing to worry about. The lightheartedness of this did not last though. This time I spotted the guy. He was standing by the woods again, though closer to the lake this time. I pointed it out to everyone. My uncle got up, pissed off this time. He started marching over again, yelling and taunting the guy. His drunkenness was really starting to show now, just in the way he was confronting the trespasser. But then we noticed there was another guy in the woods, on the complete opposite side of the yard. And when the one guy that Uncle Ben was approaching ran into the woods again, the other one stayed put. As Uncle Ben came back to the table, we said there's another one. So my cousin, myself, and my dad all got up now, ready to help my uncle confront these people. And with that, the second guy ran into the woods. By this point, we decided it was time to clean up. We started all cleaning the table and bringing plates and food inside to the kitchen. When everything was cleared out of the gazebo, we all sat inside the living room. Uncle Ben left the lights on outside, because I know he and Aunt Mel were on high alert with people running around their property being creeps. They didn't look like kids, that was the thing. And who would do this on Thanksgiving is the question. Our accepted theory was at the time that it was just some drunk older teens or young 20-year-olds with no family gatherings messing around being assholes. Eventually I wanted to grab another beer, which was in the cooler outside still. As I got up, Uncle Ben and my dad both asked me to grab one too. So I went outside and walked over to the gazebo. I made it to the cooler, suddenly feeling really uneasy. The gazebo light was off now. I looked around, analyzing my surroundings. I grabbed as many beers as I could hold, just so I wouldn't have to come back out here again. Then I started walking back to the house, when I heard one of the chairs under the gazebo sliding on the concrete. I turned around, and there was someone under the gazebo, walking around the table. He looked massively tall, like 6'5". I started yelling for Uncle Ben as I ran back to the house. He, along with my dad, came out, and I said there's a guy over there. And then, as if someone else was responding to me saying that, there was a banging from the other side of the house, like someone was hitting the siding with their hand. Seeing my uncle and my dad genuinely frightened made me frightened too. We went inside, and Uncle Ben locked the door. We didn't know how many people were outside of the house, but we felt like the house was surrounded. And Aunt Mel started shutting every last curtain and blind in the house because we felt like we were being watched from the outside. Uncle Ben called the police, which was a first. It felt completely out of character for him to involve the police in anything. He was only on the phone with them for like 5 to 10 minutes. Then we waited in the living room, with clear tensions and unease in the room. There was this quick and sudden loud bang on the glass, followed by a window in the kitchen completely shattering. Aunt Mel yelled at Uncle Ben to go get the old rifle from the closet. He yelled back the thing hadn't been loaded in years. Luckily, the police response time was pretty good. A singular beep of the siren from the police car outside let us know he arrived. One of the people outside had thrown a brick through the window with a note attached to it, saying, "Leave now, you fucking faggots," which felt like a threat. His Trump flag was also missing the next day, which created the possibility of those people's motives being political. That's really the most realistic theory, because unless my aunt, uncle, and cousin are secretly the worst neighbors ever, I see no other reason why their house would be a target for something like this. On Thanksgiving, nonetheless. There really are some sickos out there. My name is Nancy, and I work as a behavioral therapist in a local psychology office. I've been doing this for 5 years, and I've dealt with a lot of different types of people. I've had hundreds of clients now, and I used to think I've seen everything, but I didn't realize how wrong I was until I took in a young man named Peter as a client. Peter was 15 years old. Peter's father, Tom, would always come in with his son for our sessions. Tom believed his son was on the spectrum for autism, or any kind of social disorder, because all of his life he lacked friends and the ability to socialize with other people his age properly. What I would do at our therapy sessions is try to talk to Peter about things he enjoyed doing, things he wanted to do, and try to get him to open up about his personal life. But at first it was hard because he was very quiet and shy. I would ask Tom to leave the room occasionally to ask Peter some more personal questions about his family life and such, and it seems Peter opened up a bit more when his father wasn't in the room, but I always caught the vibe Tom preferred to stay in the room. I learned from Peter that his parents didn't get along at all. They would fight almost every night for as long as he could remember. He had no siblings or cousins, coming from a very small family. So one thing about me, I love the fall season and anything pumpkin. Pumpkin beers, pumpkin pie, pumpkin spice latte, I can't get enough. One therapy session talking about the freshly fall weather outside, Peter was telling me about how this was his favorite season, and I told him the same, largely because of my love for pumpkin flavored things. But later that night, when I was already in my robe getting ready for bed, there was a loud knocking at my front door. I never get knocks past 9 o'clock, so I was nervous when I went to check the window to see who was there. There wasn't anyone, but when I opened the door, I saw a mini pumpkin and a pumpkin-flavored coffee creamer on the ground in front of my door. I knew this was no coincidence. Only a few hours ago, I told Peter about my obsession with pumpkin-flavored things. When my attempted call to Thomas the next day didn't go through, I texted him a picture of the 2 items left by my door, and how inappropriate and uncomfortable it is for me to be followed home by a client. Tom texted back within 10 minutes, saying that his son would never do something like that. He almost acted offended by my accusation. Momentarily, it got me wondering, what if it was just a gift from a neighbor or something? The week went by, and I wondered if I should terminate my relationship with Peter as a client, but I decided not to see how the next session would go. The following Monday, Peter and Tom came in like usual. Peter seemed to be acting as normal. By now, he seemed very happy to talk to me, but I thought I saw it for what it was now. That he may have thought he was attracted to me, being possibly the only woman to speak to him with respect in his life. During that session, I brought up the little gifts at my front door with a smile, not directly accusing him of leaving them, just hinting at what a coincidence it was, and I noticed Tom getting annoyed in the corner by my bringing it up. Peter acted shocked and agreed it was a huge coincidence. It was a truly bizarre situation, and I didn't know what to do. But if it happened again, I knew I'd have to terminate our relationship. 2 nights later, a knock at my door again while I was in the living room watching a movie. My heart sank because I already knew what I was expecting. I checked the window again, and no one was there. So I slowly opened the door and sighed out of disgust when I saw more pumpkin-flavored things on my stoop. This time a pumpkin pie, pumpkin Cheerios, and pumpkin Oreos. It was a little past 9 o'clock at this point. I got my cell phone and took a picture of the items once again and sent it to Tom. I was about to start typing out a text about why I could no longer see them, but I heard the ding of someone's phone receiving a text right to my left, in the bushes in front of my house. I started walking slowly over to it, saying Peter's name. I saw someone hiding in the bush as I got close enough, but it wasn't Peter. It was Tom. We looked each other in the eyes, and he said, "Hi Nancy, you look beautiful as always." And I screamed. I ran into my house and locked the door, seconds before he tried opening it and started banging on it. I screamed to leave me alone or I'd call the police. He apologized through the door and yelled he's leaving. I watched through the window as he left to his car and drove away. This explained not only the unwanted gifts at my door, but possibly the sound of my side gate closing in the middle of the night weeks prior to this. I have no idea how long he was stalking me at my house. My brother, who's a police officer, advised me not to even bother trying to get a restraining order because there wasn't any evidence that he meant me any harm, and it would just be he said, she said allegations. However, I did report the case to the police, and added that Peter may be in an unsafe, abusive household. I don't know what Tom's end goal was by following me home and leaving those things by my door. Based on the way he tried to open my door after I locked it though, says he wasn't trying to be a romantic type. I feel sorry for Peter. His dad brought him in to see me only as some kind of method of getting closer to me. It was a Friday night in early October a long time ago. I was with my 3 friends, Jose, Brian, and Tanya. We were being bored teenagers wanting something to do in the spirit of the season. It was a nice fall night out, low 60s, nice breeze, so we wanted to be outside. Not much goes on in our boring town, and we weren't old enough to go to bars or anything. We decided to ride our bikes up Miller's Road to this old closed-down pumpkin farm nicknamed Farmer John's Pumpkin Patch. It used to be a literal farm surrounded by crops on one side and forest on the other. The alleged Farmer John, or whoever actually owned it, didn't live there anymore. It was sold, and whoever bought the land just never did anything with it for a long time. It was a 20-minute bike ride up Miller's Road, which is an extremely quiet road traffic-wise. Just lots of cornfields and farms around this area. When we got there, we rode our bikes off the road onto the grass, all with our flashlights on. We leaned our bikes up against the old abandoned house that the owner used to live in. We walked around the overgrown grass a bit, checking out where the pumpkin patch used to be and where the animals in the little petting zoo area used to be. There's something really cool about exploring abandoned places at night, but also kind of spooky. We went back to the house where we left the bikes. Breaking into it was relatively easy since we weren't the first ones to do so. The door was already knocked off the hinges. All we had to do was kick it open. This is where it got really creepy though, being in an abandoned house at night. Even as a thrill seeker, it's a bit unnerving, even when you're 4 people. I'd say 5 minutes into being inside the house, we started to hear thumps from upstairs. Like periodic thumps, not just random thumps. Jose and I decided to head upstairs to check it out. Tanya didn't want to go upstairs because she was scared, so Brian stayed downstairs with her. When we got to the upstairs, the thumping was much louder for sure. It came from the left side of the stairs. Our flashlights revealed a bunch of doors up here, all open, leading into what were probably once all bedrooms. Our footsteps were loud as we walked closer to the room with the thumping. There was no way to hide it on these rickety, creaky floorboards. As we got to the corner room doorway, the thumping stopped. I whispered to Jose, "Is it an animal?" He went, "Shh." I pointed my flashlight into the room, starting from the left side, working the light to the right. I stopped when my flashlight landed on a male's figure in the corner of the room facing the wall, with what appeared to be blood on the wall in front of him, probably banging his head on it, creating those thumping sounds. Jose aimed his light at him too, and we both jumped back. We left in a hurry, and as we ran down the stairs, a horrifying, gut-wrenching scream came from the room we were just in, causing all 4 of us to scream. As we left the house and got to our bikes, we heard stomping down the stairs from inside the house as the screaming got louder. We all ran to our bikes, absolutely freaked the fuck out, and we pedaled as fast as we could out of there. The screaming stopped before it ever came out of the house. We didn't look back. We continued pedaling all the way up Miller's Road till we got back to my house. I have no idea what we witnessed in there, and I won't even try to explain it. When I was a little kid, there was this top of the mountains resort I went to with my family 2 different times. The resort was shut down a long time ago, but I remember it for the most part to be a very nice, family-friendly place. Both times we went, it was in the fall, because my mom wanted to go for the changing colors of the leaves. This story takes place the second time we went to the resort. I was, I think, 6 years old. My older brother Corey was around 10, and my little brother was around 4. My parents paid most attention to my little brother, of course, with the expectation that my older brother would be kind of watching out for me. On this particular night, they were doing the bonfire marshmallow roast and hayride. We had ridden the hayride already while the sun was going down. After that was the bonfire and mini fireworks show. At the bonfire, I met this man who started talking to me, asking me if I was having fun and if I'd been to the resort before. He said he was one of the owners. Then he gave me a little laser pointer toy, and I instantly trusted him because, I was 6. The hayride driver announced that he was doing a final ride in the dark, and that he was going to drive down the big hill, which sounded exciting. My older brother suggested we do it. He made some friends at the resort, so I think he disappeared to go look for them to ride the hayride with us. In the meantime, I was still sitting by the bonfire. My dad was drinking beer with his other dad on the other side of the fire, and my mom was with my little brother roasting marshmallows. Eventually, I went to go ask my mom where Corey went, and she said he's going on the hayride and to hurry and get on before they left. So I hurried to the mini line of like 5 people waiting to get on, and when I was on, there were about 15 to 20 people on there, but I didn't see my brother. I sat on one of the haystacks anyway, waiting, as the truck started up, indicating it was about to leave. I saw that man from before climb into the truck with a woman behind him, and he came to sit next to me when he saw me. He asked where my family was, and I shrugged my shoulders. Speaking of that, my brother never got on the hayride. The woman sat next to him. She looked at me and smiled, and he said that's his wife. He asked if I still had that laser pointer, and I said yeah and showed it to him. He smiled. The whole time I spoke with the man, his wife next to him was looking at me, smiling. During the hayride, the two were basically talking to me the whole time. Then when we were approaching the hill drop where the driver said he was going to floor it, the man next to me saw I was nervous. So when we drove down the hill, he grabbed my arms and lifted them in the air so as to do the no hands thing that people like to do on roller coasters. It actually made me laugh because the drop down was fun. The man asked me if I had been to the arcade of the resort yet, and when I shook my head no, he told me he had the key to a lot of the games and asked if I wanted it. I of course shook my head yes. He said he'd just have to go get it and go there with me, and it would be all mine. We one by one left the back of the truck as we got back to the bonfire. The man and woman both walked alongside me, and the woman held my hand and kept calling me sweetie anytime she said something to me. The man said the arcade wasn't far. As we walked away from the brightness of the huge bonfire and into the darkness of the pathway back towards the cabins and main buildings of the resort, I heard Cody's voice call my name from behind. I turned, and it was Cody looking at us. I yelled back, "We're going to the arcade," and the man and woman looked back but didn't say anything. My brother didn't follow us or say anything else. After we got further from the bonfire, the woman's grip on my hand got tighter and we started walking faster. Something wasn't right because her grip was starting to hurt me. I also noticed we weren't going in the direction of the clubhouse. We were heading towards the parking lot. When I asked where we were going, the man said we're getting the key to the arcade games. Next thing I remember, my mom's panicked screaming voice was heard behind us, screaming let go of him. My mom was running over hysterical, and the two strangers stepped away from me, and I remember the woman saying some BS like they were taking me to the front desk area. My mom yelled and cursed at them, and the two of them just quickly walked away into the darkness. I wish my dad was with my mom at that moment to kick the man's ass. The worst part is they got to just drive off and potentially do this to somebody else. My mom asked everybody at the bonfire if they had seen those people. Nobody recognized them. She also reported this to the resort and the police. But really, what could they do once the couple disappeared? The idea that I was almost kidnapped by a creepy older couple when I was only 6 or 7 is stomach churning, even to this day. In late October, my girlfriend Stacy and I took a road trip to Stowe, Vermont. We rented a cabin on the website Glamming Hub, only about a 20-minute ride from the village. It was on a nice hilltop with a view of the fall foliage, which was just the reason why we took this trip. We had the rental from Thursday night to Sunday. The cabin had a code lock system. The owner sent me the combination before we arrived, and it worked seamlessly. Stepping in, we looked around the place, and it was nice and cozy. Literally everything was made of wood, and it had this very old-fashioned country feel. It even had this distinct smell that just reminded us of, well, I guess a country log cabin. There was a bathroom, a small kitchen, 3 bedrooms, and a living room. It was plenty of space for the two of us. There were 2 TVs, one in the master bedroom and one in the living room. There was this other door that was locked though, which we presumed led to the 3rd bedroom that was listed on the ad. Though we didn't know why it would be locked, it wasn't a big deal at all, and we presumed the owner had some personal stuff in there. Plus, he knew it would only be us 2. We put most of our luggage in the 2nd bedroom so that we could leave the master bedroom nice and neat. Since we arrived pretty late on Thursday, we went straight out to dinner in town. Then we walked around the village for a little bit before returning to the cabin. By then it was late, so we called it a night after a movie. The next day was a cloudy, chilly one. We went out to hike along some dirt trails in the woods near the cabin, which was very peaceful. Upon returning to the cabin, I showered and changed out of my hiking attire and into more appropriate attire for hitting a nice restaurant. When I got out from the shower, Stacy told me she heard something in the bedroom with a locked door. She said it sounded like a radio or recording. I went up to the door and put my ear up on it to try and listen, but it was silent on the other side. I knocked on the door to the dismay of Stacy. She told me to stop because the idea of me knocking on the door trying to see if someone was in there freaked her out. To be honest, I slightly did it for that reason, just to tease her. While Stacy was in the shower, I was sitting in the living room watching whatever I could find on the TV. That's when I thought, just barely, I heard the slightest sound from inside that room. I muted the TV and went to put my ear over the door again. I did hear this slight speaking noise, like it could be from a radio. I messaged and then called the host and told him about it. He said he wasn't sure why his wife would have locked the door, but that she may have left some of her stuff in there. He said as for the speaker noise, he'd have to ask his wife. Stacy and I went out for lunch after her shower. I didn't tell her about hearing the noise as well because I didn't want to creep her out, and it was obvious to me the guy's wife just left an electronic device in there or something. We went to this restaurant on Main Street in town called Harrison's. After that, we just took a drive around the area, then stopped at a park and relaxed for a bit. That's when the host called me and said that his wife told him she didn't lock anything in there, so he's not sure why that is or what we could be hearing. He offered to come by and unlock the door and check it out, to which I said sure. So with that, we headed back to the house. It was about a 20-minute drive back. When we got back, Stacy let herself in and collapsed on the couch, tired from, I guess, eating and walking around. I listened into the room again, and I still heard the same sounds from before. I said, "Hang on, I'll be right back," to Stacy as I walked outside. I didn't know why I didn't think of doing this sooner. I went to the window to the bedroom with the locked door. There were no curtains or anything blocking the view inside. As I stood on my tiptoes to look into the room, I was horrified. I saw this grossly skinny, tall, 20-something-year-old guy in a hood dancing slowly in the center of the room. He had what looked to be a small radio in his hand. He noticed me quickly at the window, and he stopped and looked at me, smiling. I started screaming Stacy's name, yelling, "Get out of the house." She met me at the door, panicked and confused. I told her just get in the car. I grabbed our 2 bags, leaving whatever stray items behind, and threw them in the trunk, driving off. I then called the host and told him to call the cops because someone was in the house. An hour later, while we were sitting in town, I got a call back from the host who said police arrived and the 3rd bedroom was opened and no one was in there. However, they found multiple empty bags of chips under the bed, implying someone was in fact in there. We went back to collect our remaining belongings and worked out a refund between the host and the website. Of course, we didn't stay there after that. We went to a nearby motel and stayed till Sunday, then we went home. I'll tell you though, what I saw through that window, that dancing skinny figure, I couldn't sleep for nights, especially with the thought that he was in there the entire time we were, even while we were asleep. It happened after a long Friday night halfway through October, a rainy one, and drinks were involved. I was at this Halloween-themed housewarming party with all my friends. I didn't wear a costume because I came straight from work already pretty exhausted. I took an Adderall to wake myself up before going, and I stopped at a gas station to pick up some White Claws. There were a decent amount of people there, I'd say 25 to 30. I had to meet a few people that I'd never met before. All this socializing and drinking was keeping me awake, but deep down I kind of wanted to just get home and go to bed. Working in a hospital means I get crazy hours and my sleep schedule's all over the place. I eventually saw a good opportunity to do an Irish goodbye through the backyard. I didn't even really have it in me to say goodbye to 20 people. I really shouldn't have driven home with alcohol in my system, and I don't recommend anybody ever do that. Always call an Uber. I ran through the rain and got in my Subaru and just started to drive. No music on, I wasn't in the mood. I just wanted peace and quiet, to listen to the rain hitting the windshield. Then, driving down some quiet residential road, I spotted a girl walking in the rain. No umbrella, no jacket, nothing. She stopped walking and looked at my car as I drove nearer to her. I definitely let out a sigh as I contemplated whether I should just keep going or not, and my more compassionate side told me to pull over. I rolled down my window and asked if she needed a ride. Without answering, she got in the back seat of my car. I asked her where she was going. She said just down to the end of this road, so that's where I took her. As I stopped at the second stop sign, I asked her why she's out in the rain. She said she was just in a hurry back and didn't want to call a cab. I said that's understandable, making a joke about how expensive cabs and Ubers are. I introduced myself as Jake, and she said, "Allie, thanks for picking me up." After that, no more words were exchanged. I continued down the street until I saw a dead-end sign approaching. I stopped at the final sign, then asked, "Is it past the dead-end sign?" She didn't answer. As I was halfway through that little intersection, I looked in the rearview mirror, and my heart sank. She wasn't in the reflection. I stomped on the brake and turned around. She wasn't in the back seat. I quickly pulled to the side of the road and got out. I hurried to check the entire backseat row. She wasn't there. Not on the seat, not on the floor. I looked down the empty road, lit up only by the occasional streetlight. There was no one in sight. But there was no possible way she even got out from the car, as I had not once heard the door either opening or closing, and there's no possible way she just snuck out from the car unheard. I was starting to question my sanity. I started feeling around the seat and floor where she sat. It was completely dry. It would have had to have been somewhat wet from her after being in the rain. I stood there in the rain, dumbfounded, confused, and scared. I looked around me again, and then I realized to the right of the car, right next to where I pulled over, was a fence, and beyond that fence was a cemetery. And her response to my question moments before dawned on me when I asked her, "Where are you going?" And she said, "Down to the end of this road." I looked at the cemetery, which was at the end of the road. Then I got back in my car and did a 3-point turn and hurried home. I don't think I was anywhere near drunk enough to be hallucinating shit. Last October, my friends and I went to a haunted corn maze in Oak Hill, Ohio. It was supposed to be the best corn maze in our area. I want to leave the name out just out of respect for the family that runs it. I was with my friends Joe, Carl, and Cody. We always do haunted house type stuff every October. On the line to get into the attraction, we overheard some kids saying how last year the maze had to shut down for a night because some kid was actually hurt by one of the workers. We joined in on the conversation, and apparently someone dressed in one of the costumes actually pushed one of the customers, and they had to close for the night. I guess that added a little bit to the nerves, like that maybe we'd feel like the costume actors would actually go above and beyond just the typical jump scares. Once we got in, it felt like a normal corn maze. It started slow, then, the occasional actors would jump out from behind a corner or out of the crops. There were multiple speakers tucked away in the background, blasting spooky sound effects to add to the ambiance, and it overall was just littered with Halloween decorations and props everywhere. We came to this little split. There were 2 directions we could go, left and right, and there was a sign in the middle with 2 arrows. Left side said, "This way to safety," and the right side said, "Danger, keep out." So 2 and 2, we decided to split up. Cody and I went to the left, the safety side. As we walked, we expected it to be the opposite of safety, that this side would probably be the scarier side or have more jump scares. Well, turns out that was right. Kind of. We turned this corner, and there was this guy in a costume just standing there holding a pumpkin. The costume was very bizarre. It was an all-black outfit with this weird blank mask over his face. It was a complete pullover mask, but it only had 2 eye holes. No mouth hole, not even holes for the nose. He didn't jump out or make any screaming noises. He just walked up to us holding up the pumpkin, motioning for us to take it. We kinda just laughed, thinking it was part of the gimmick. Then, in a deep, raspy voice, almost like how Batman speaks in the Dark Knight movies, like he were masking his voice, he said, "Take it, please." We looked at him continuing to laugh while moving forward, and he started to follow us, repeating himself over and over, saying, "Take it." Eventually it seemed like it was getting a little stale though, like the joke was over and he should have stopped and went back to his spot. But he kept following us for over a minute. He kept saying, "Take it," his tone getting angrier sounding. Then he said, "Take it or I'll kill you." Now I didn't take that seriously, obviously, given that we were in a corn maze, but I did find it to be a little aggressive of a line. I took the pumpkin from him, and he seemed to stop following us. We continued walking until we bumped into Joe and Carl again at the point where the 2 separate paths merged, and they both laughed, asking why I was holding a pumpkin. I explained. Everyone agreed I should just take the pumpkin home with me at this point. Anyway, continuing on through the corn maze, it was a pretty traditional standard attraction after that. At one point though, one of the actors actually broke character and came up to me and said I can't steal the pumpkin. I told him one of the workers gave it to me, and he asked which one. I said the guy in the black with the white blank mask. He seemed confused and asked where the worker was. I told him on the left side of the fork in the path. He then walked in that direction, not saying anything. We all thought it was really weird and took us out of the immersion a little bit. Quickly after that, we made it to the end, and it was only then when there was enough light that I realized the pumpkin was carved on the inside, and the top of it was cut. I grabbed it by the stem and pulled off the top, expecting something to be in there. And oh, there was. On the bottom of the inside of the pumpkin, at first I didn't know what they were. To be honest, I thought they were some kind of food, till I picked one up. I realized it was a severed human finger, a very real one, and there were probably 9 more in there. On the side of the pumpkin was a pair of eyes drawn in black Sharpie, and under them said, "Always watching," with a smiley face next to it. My friends and I screamed and freaked out, and we ran to the nearest worker. She didn't know what to do either, as she was just as young as us. She called for one of her superiors, and he called the police. The whole attraction was shut down as police came and basically listened to our story. We stayed on the premises while police searched the place, but it was basically in the middle of nowhere, so he could have been anywhere. The police took the appendages for, I'm assuming, forensic analysis. I don't think a body was ever found to match the fingers. We left that place unharmed that night, but not without a permanently traumatizing experience. I experienced a sketchy situation on Halloween a couple years ago. My cousin came over for Halloween that year just to go trick-or-treating. I was 15 at the time, and I know that's a bit old for trick-or-treating, but hey, it's free candy. My cousin was also 15, and we were planning on taking it easy that Halloween and just hitting enough houses to make a reasonable haul before we went home. My friend and his younger brother went with us, but we eventually went our separate ways. It was pretty busy, and there was a whole lot of kids at every house with decorations up. My cousin Jack and I decided to hit some of the houses with lights on with no kids already on the front stoops. Lots of houses that we had already hit before that had no decorations up and had lights on all had people inside ready to deliver candy to trick-or-treaters. But all the other kids I know for a fact target the heavily decorated houses. We ended up getting through like 4 houses in a minute because of no lineups. The next house in the line was not decorated at all, but there was a light on, so we thought we'd give it a shot. We knocked on the door, and immediately an older man opened the door. He opened it completely, which revealed 5 other guys just standing there. They were much younger than the older man who opened the door. I'm guessing they were in their late 30s, while the older man who opened the door was in his early 50s. He held out a bowl of candy, then reached in and grabbed some and put it in each of our bags. The older man asked Jack what his name was, and Jack responded to his question using a fake name. Jack said bye before the older man could say anything else. We walked off the front stoop, and alarms immediately started going off in my head. Jack seemed alarmed as well, and we started talking about how sketchy that was. Why were there 6 guys right there when we opened the door? Why were they all acting so strange? Those were the questions that were floating around in my head. Jack and I were a little spooked because of how weird that was. We went to 2 more houses, then we started walking to my house. Jack and I glanced back at that house to see a car pulling out of the driveway. The car drove up the way we were walking and started slowing down right next to us. The roads were clear, and all the trick-or-treaters were on the sidewalks, so there should have been no reason the car slowed down right next to us. We picked up the pace a bit, and that's when another car sped up behind them, eventually beginning to go the same pace as the first car. I recognized the guy driving the first car, and the guy driving the second car. The guy driving the first car was the older guy who gave us the candy, and the driver in the second car was one of the 5 guys just standing there suspiciously. There was also somebody in the passenger seat in the first car, but all I could see was the silhouette of the person. When Jack and I were 2 houses away from my house, we saw the first car park right across the street from my house. We didn't even see where the second car went, we just bolted back inside my house. Our parents, who were sitting in the living room talking, asked us what was wrong. We told them the whole story, and when we were finished, We went to the window to check if that car was still parked across the street, and it was. But then 5 seconds after I checked, it drove off. It had probably been parked there for the 5 minutes since we went inside my house. My mom and Jack's mom wanted Jack and I to go show our dads the house where all those guys were in. But eventually, our parents calmed us down and told us it was just a Halloween gag or something. Though I have my own theory on what was going on. The reason why there were 6 guys in the main doorway was because when a lone trick-or-treater or group of trick-or-treaters much younger than Jack and I came to the door, they were looking to jump or snatch them. But when they saw that Jack and I were teenagers and literally the same height as them, they decided to play it cool, even though they still looked sketchy. And why they were following us in their cars, we will never know. But when the night ended and everyone was off to bed, I realized that house is only 1 block from my house. This was many years ago. My old buddy Anthony and I were getting on our costumes to go trick-or-treating. We started going house to house just like a normal night. We got to the old part of our neighborhood, where our parents would tell us not to go because we were only 12 years old and we didn't know our way around there. We walked up to the first house there, and a nice lady opened the door who gave us big Hershey bars. After that, while we were walking to literally only the second house in this part of the neighborhood, this random guy came screaming and running towards us down the street. He came out from behind a church. We thought it was just a Halloween prank at first, like anyone would, so we stood there just laughing. But as soon as he got up to us, he tried taking the pillowcase full of candy out of my hands, so my buddy Anthony started hitting him with his pillowcase. By the time we got to this old neighborhood, we had a lot of candy, so being hit with that pillowcase surely had to hurt. Anthony was hitting him until he let go of the pillowcase and started running away. We thought that was the end of him, until we started walking back, extremely shocked and confused. I called my mom and asked her if she could pick us up because we were pretty far from home, and that whole experience kind of made us want to get off the streets. As soon as she got to our location, we explained what happened, and she almost didn't believe us. That's how ridiculous it sounded. We got home around 10 p.m., and shortly after that, there was a knock at the front door. My dad figured it was just a late-night trick-or-treater, so we went to answer the door, and standing there was a man in a jumpsuit with a Michael Myers mask. My dad was confused because he was wondering what he was doing out alone trick-or-treating, and based on his height and build, he looked like an older man, not a kid or a teenager. Either way, my dad just gave him candy and didn't really care to say anything. But while Anthony and I were sitting on the couch, we noticed him staring at us, like his masked face was staring right at us in the living room. I felt slightly unsettled by it and was waiting for him to just turn and leave. My dad ended up shutting the door in his face when he wouldn't walk away. So fast forward to like 1 in the morning. We were about to go to bed, but on our way upstairs, we heard a knock at the door. There was no way I was opening the door at that hour, and I knew this couldn't be anything good this late. So I went to tell my dad there was a knock at the door, and he said just ignore it. So Anthony and I go up to the room and turn on a movie. Anthony heard something though, and told me to mute the TV, and when I did, I heard it too. It was the sound of leaves crackling in the backyard. I looked in the backyard, and I saw that man in the Michael Myers costume, swinging on the swing set in our yard, staring into my bedroom window. I felt like my heart jumped out of my chest and up into my throat. It's like he was purposely recreating a scene from a horror movie to scare us. I ran into my dad's room and told him that the man in the Michael Myers costume was on our swing set. He took on this expression of shock and concern just like ours, and he looked outside, but he didn't see anyone there. Then, right when we were looking, we heard a knock at the back door. My dad went downstairs to the door, but nobody was there. This man was toying with us, harassing us to scare us. It had to be a Halloween prank. My dad was equally concerned now. All of a sudden, I heard my mom scream in the other room. So Anthony, my dad, and I ran upstairs to see the man in the Michael Myers costume standing at the end of the bed staring at my mom. My dad told Anthony and I to run and call the police. My friend and I ran downstairs and grabbed the nearest phone. We called 911 and told them that a man dressed as Michael Myers had broken into our house. The operator asked if everyone was all right. I said he's upstairs, and my dad has him, but we needed cops immediately. She told me to stay on the phone and that police were en route to the house. From upstairs, there was the sound of my dad screaming, followed by their sliding window being pushed open. The two of us ran upstairs to see my mom and dad laying on the floor. My mom was crying, and my dad's nose was bleeding. My dad said the man jumped out through the window. When the police arrived, Anthony, my dad, and I told them everything we could. They did a sweep of the property inside and out, which took about 20 minutes, and the premises was clear. I think that might have been my last year trick-or-treating, and for good reason. I still wonder if the man that tried to take my candy was the man wearing the Michael Myers costume, and I deeply regret leaving that part out of the story we gave to the police. Halloween was always one of my least favorite days of the year. I never had a lot of friends in middle school or high school, so I never really had any plans on Halloween. In middle school, I didn't really go trick-or-treating, and in high school, I never really went to any Halloween parties. This was also at a time when my sister was away at college, so due to the fact that my parents were hardly ever home, I'd usually be home alone. This was one of many Halloween nights that I was left home alone. Halloween was on a Friday this particular year, so kids were out in droves and later than usual. My parents were gone for the week. My mom left a bunch of bags of candy for me to hand to kids. I got kind of sick of the doorbell ringing every 5 minutes all day, so eventually I just poured an entire bag of candies into a plastic bowl we had in one of the kitchen cabinets. My mom never really liked leaving a bowl on the stoop, but she wasn't there, so what was she gonna do? That lasted a good while because the constant ringing of the doorbell stopped for a couple hours at least, and when the bowl was empty, I refilled it. I wasn't expecting to hear the doorbell again the rest of the night because even if the bowl were emptied, I assumed people would know not to bother ringing the bell at a house with an empty bowl. So when the bell did ring again, I was not only surprised, but also felt a hint of annoyance. I ignored the first ring, but about 30 seconds later, there was another ring. This time I got up from my computer, pausing the game I was playing, and went down to check who was at the front door. I opened the door, and there were two guys in white vendetta masks holding small plastic bags with very minimal candy inside, it seemed. Neither of the two of them said trick or treat. They just ominously both stood there, and then lifted up their bags and held them open. I said, "Hang on, I'll get more candy." I felt intimidated, if I'm being honest. I went to get the bag of Reese's and grabbed a few to put in their bags. When I dropped the candies in their plastic bags, one of them, I don't know which, asked in a monotone voice, "Are you home alone?" I said no, but with a stutter because the question scared me. I said my parents are here. Then I said have a good night and shut the door. I waited by the door listening to see if I'd hear them walk down the steps. I finally heard footsteps leaving, so I felt relieved and started going back upstairs. But that question, am I home alone, kept haunting me. I couldn't just go back to my game after hearing that. And then I realized the possibility as to why they would have asked me that, because there were no cars at all in the driveway or in front of the house, yet the lights were on. Then when I, an at the time 14-year-old kid, opened the door, I probably looked like the easiest target ever. My paranoia was clearly justified though, because while sitting at my desk trying to get back into my game, I heard this loud bang from my window. I was on the second floor, so clearly something was just thrown at the window. My heart started to pound the inside of my chest again. In response, I turned off the computer screen and desk lamp to bring darkness into the room. I then looked out the window, and though I couldn't see anything out there because it was too dark, another object was thrown at the window right in front of me, this one scaring me even more than the last. It sounded like a rock. I instantly felt this intensifying sense of danger. I ducked back down behind the window and left my bedroom. I didn't have a cell phone at the time, only an iPod Touch, so I had to get to the kitchen house phone. I crawled my way down the stairs so not to be seen through any of the windows. I got to the kitchen phone and dialed 911, but I think they saw even just the light from the little screen of the phone, because there was suddenly an aggressive banging on one of the kitchen windows. By now I was on the phone with 911 begging for help. As I crouch walked out of the kitchen and towards the back door, I screamed, realizing there was one of the guys in the vendetta masks on the other side of the back door, trying to open it. I started screaming into the phone for help, but around the same time, a familiar voice was calling from the other side of the front door. It was our next door neighbor, Chris. I rushed to answer the door and he came in, clearly happy to see I was okay. He took the phone from me and spoke to the police for me. He saw the two masked men enter my backyard from his kitchen window and saw them throwing multiple things at the windows of the house. By the time any police officers arrived at the house, those two masked men clearly knew better than to have stuck around. Chris invited me to sleep at his place for the night just to be safe. He was good friends with my dad before he moved, so he really didn't mind helping me. Having good relations with your neighbors may just save your life one day, you never know. What I do know is this experience made me hate Halloween just that much more. This happened back when I was 17, my last Halloween at home before going away to college. It was Halloween in our peaceful town where nothing bad ever happens. Our house is in the wealthier side of town, and while our house would be described as gorgeous by anyone not from the area, the real head turner is our next door neighbor's house. It sits on that line of being called just a huge house or a mansion. They always go crazy with their decorations for any holiday, specifically Halloween and Christmas. This one year was no exception. By October 1st, they already had all their crazy decorations out. Some houses go the cute and innocently spooky route, like with smiling ghosts and blow-up decorations. But our neighbors go the actual scary route, with the fake graves, fake bloody body bags, actually scary-looking fake corpses, etc. It actually draws a lot of attention. People know to drive by and take videos, so it's never uncommon to see cars just sitting in front of their house in the middle of the street from time to time. I'll rename my neighbors' names to Mike and Donna just to not blow up their spots even more. Fast forward to Halloween Day. It was luckily a Friday this year, so that meant parties and all that could be held on actual Halloween. My dog Bear sleeps downstairs in the corner of our dining room, and he woke me up really early morning, like 4 a.m. when it was still pitch black outside. He was barking at something outside. I yelled across the house to shut up, Bear, and my mom came out into the hall and did the same. Bear stopped barking after this, but I had no idea what he was barking at. I fell back asleep quickly after that, then woke up to my alarm like 2 hours later. So I started getting ready for school as my dad was leaving for work, and as he stepped out onto the front deck, he came back in and got mad at me and said, "Damn it, Zach, clean up the dog shit." He thought I let our dog crap in the front of the house for some reason. I told him I definitely didn't though. He was in a hurry, so he left without more arguing. Next up, it was my turn to leave for school, and as I left the house, I got a whiff of something kind of unpleasant. I now knew what my dad was talking about. I didn't see any dog crap anywhere though. Later when I got home around 2, I still smelled that smell. I had no idea what it was, but it was really starting to stink. My parents were both at work, and my parents wanted me to hand out candy when trick-or-treaters started coming. It wasn't until around 4 to 5 that they started coming. When I opened the door to the first few trick-or-treaters, I'd get a whiff of that increasingly horrible stink, and the kids and their parents clearly smelt it too because they were all commenting on it. One parent told me it was even worse next door. I started to know whenever to expect the doorbell to ring because I'd hear groups of people pointing out how horrible it smelt. At one point, I saw Mike and Donna in front of their house, looking around. So I went outside and went over to ask them if they smelt that too, but that was hardly a question because it got worse on their property. It clearly was coming from the front of their property, but there wasn't any dog crap or anything. The smell was coming from one of the body bag decorations, only it apparently wasn't a decoration. The couple had a number of fake body bags leaned on things like the mailbox and their front tree, but there was one just laying flat on the ground, and Mike said to Donna that he didn't put that one there when she asked. The smell was unbearable from this bag. Mike ran to grab a knife and cut the bag open, and what we saw made me sick. He of course cut the top of the bag open, revealing the rotting face of an actual human corpse inside the bag. We all put our hands over our mouths in disgust, wanting to throw up. And of course, there was no audience of kids and parents to see what was going on. It became a huge scene. Mike called the cops, and their whole front yard literally became a crime scene with people gathering from all over to watch, even though the cops kept telling everyone to clear out. The body was taken away. I told the police that my dog Bear was barking last night at like 4 a.m., and he may have been barking at whoever dumped the body there. Mike told my dad a week later that the body turned out to be a local 30-something-year-old guy who had taken his own life. As for who dropped the body there or why, that's unclear. Mike and Donna are very likable people, so we all think it was somebody who just looked at them as some rich, snobby household that overdoes it with the decorations for attention. Obviously, there are some sick people out there. I'm a single 24-year-old female living alone in my grandma's house. The house was basically left to me after she passed away because my mom didn't want to sell it and she also doesn't want to move out of her house. So I get to stay in my grandma's house alone. This was last year, Halloween. My first one living in the house alone. I considered just leaving a bowl of candies on the stoop, but I figured that was not the best way to associate a friendly face to the house that I was new to living in. The day went pretty normally. Halloween was on a Sunday, so the trick-or-treaters started coming early on in the day, and it continued all day. Some people asked if my grandma was home, sadly unaware that she had passed away. I explained to those people that I'm her granddaughter, and that I live here now. My grandma was a very loved lady, so it was no shock to me how many people asked about her that day. Mostly everyone who knocked on the door was very friendly and normal. Later on that night, past 9 o'clock, when the trick-or-treaters had dwindled down almost completely, I heard a voice outside the front door say trick-or-treat. No knocking or ringing the doorbell. I was in the kitchen, so I definitely would have heard any knocking, but it did seem possible that he thought he pressed the doorbell but didn't. When I went out to greet him, I saw it was this average height guy in a purple suit and creepy plastic mask. I don't really know what the costume was supposed to be, but it was interesting, I guess. When I opened the door, he said trick or treat again, but the strange thing was I could tell the guy was a bit older, like a full-grown adult. He was changing his voice to be a little higher pitched, like he was trying to sound younger. It was strange. I assumed he may have had some issues, so whatever. I asked him what his costume was supposed to be, but he didn't answer. We just made eye contact through his mask. I took 2 pieces of candy and dropped it in his pillow sack he was holding, which looked completely empty. That was the part that weirded me out the most. He looked into the sack, then back at me. I said have a good night and closed the door. That was weird. He was the last trick-or-treater of the night. I wondered if he was accompanied by anybody watching over him, because I assumed he was special needs or something. He was clearly a 30-something-year-old man behind that mask. The rest of the candies I just left on the dining room table. Halloween was over. Or so I thought. The next night, around the same time as the previous night, I heard a loud trick-or-treat at the front door. That same creepy fake high-pitched voice. I had to have imagined it, I thought. But when I went to check through the peephole in the door, it was him again, in the same costume, and by the looks of it, he had an equally empty pillow sack as the night before. I didn't open the door, no shot in hell. A few minutes later, I heard him shout trick or treat again. I ignored it. In fact, I shut off the living room lights to basically say, hey, get off my stoop, I'm not answering the door. I went upstairs to my room and shut the door and started watching TV in there instead. Out of sight, out of mind. Until I heard a pop at my window. Something was thrown at it, like a rock. I muted the volume on the TV, and a few seconds later, I heard the familiar trick-or-treat. I suddenly was in panic mode. Why was he doing this? I went to the window, lifted it up, and looked down. That man in the purple suit and mask was looking up at me. I threatened him with calling the police. In response, he very slowly lifted his empty-looking pillow sack up and held it open. It seemed he was some asshole trying to scare me, but Halloween was over, and I wasn't amused. I called 911, and police showed up in under 10 minutes. The guy was still outside. He refused to talk to them, so they put him in handcuffs and took his mask off, and as I figured, he was some creepy-looking 30-something-year-old guy. They told me they were bringing him down to the station, but apparently they let him out within 48 hours, because 2 nights later, he came back to my house, this time at the backyard door. He never knocked or rang the bell. He'd just stand outside with his empty sack and costume, creepily yelling trick or treat. I called the police again and told them he's back, and once again the police came and arrested him. I swear to God, a week later the man had returned once again, throwing a rock at my window. This time when I called 911, he seemed to actually disappear before the police had gotten there. But regardless, it seemed the police didn't really care to do anything. Either that or they couldn't. Luckily, I think the man lost interest because he hasn't returned since then. At least as far as I know, unless he's been hiding in my bushes watching me, which is disturbing to imagine. Halloween is coming up, and I'm kind of nervous he's gonna come back. I was 10 years old in 5th grade. I was planning on going trick-or-treating with my friend Jordan. We already knew the route we were going to take. It was the first year that we were being allowed to trick-or-treat alone. My mom gave us big bags for candy. It was a weekend night, so we could luckily stay out later. We did some day trick-or-treating, and after about 2 hours, we went back to my house and took a break. My parents ordered Chinese food for dinner. Jordan stayed for dinner. Then around like 7 or 8, we went back out for some night trick-or-treating. My parents wanted us to stay close. We obviously said yes to that, but we kind of strayed off a different, further away route that we knew less kids would go down. Everything was going as normal. Less houses would open their doors after dark, we noticed though. But there were still some kids out trick-or-treating since it was the weekend. One house we got to, we rang the bell, and within like 10 seconds, as if he were waiting by the door, a man opened up. Looking back, he was a bald man, looked like he was 45, and had a small gap between his 2 front teeth that we noticed when he smiled as he opened the door. He was overly friendly from the start, complimenting our costumes, trying to ask us where we're from, and just being overly conversational. We just wanted candy. He eventually said he has the candy inside if we want to come in for a second, followed with he wanted to show us this cool Halloween decoration he had inside. He described it as some talking skeleton trapped in a cage begging to be let out. Jordan and I weren't comfortable going inside this man's house though, obviously. When we said that in not so many words, he said he understood, and asked if we wanted to come in real quick just to pick out the candies that we wanted. We said it's fine, he could just give us whatever. He tried to insist one more time, and we said no, and he said no worries, then went inside to grab us some random candies. They were these chewy candies wrapped in see-through wrappers. We thanked him and left. As we walked away from his front door, we noticed he didn't close the door. He just watched us as we left. We walked away from his house down the sidewalk, and after another glance back, we now noticed he was walking in front of his house slowly with his hands on his hips. We considered running away, but there were other people down the block, so nothing would happen most likely. We just skipped the next house and went to the house 2 doors down. A woman answered, and we told her about the creepy man 2 doors down. She said she didn't know him at all, but that we should tell our parents when we get home. We ran into these 2 kids going in the direction of the creepy man's house, and we stopped them and warned them not to go there, and their reaction said it all. They already went to his house too, and had the same exact thing happen to them. They looked to be our age as well. We asked what candy he gave them, and it turned out to be the same candies. They already threw theirs away, so we dug into our bags, found them, and threw them away as well. If anybody would be sus enough to lace candies, it would be a guy like that. We wondered what exactly that man was trying to do if we were to have actually entered his house. Like, was he actually just innocently trying to show us something, or did he have other intentions? Our question was answered the next day, because that man ended up on the news for attempting to lure kids into his house, claiming he had a new puppy. It seemed his story changed for different kids, possibly based on their ages. Thank God it sounded like everyone was smart enough to not enter the man's house.